Hey, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of How's That Day? It's a culture rundown with Tom and Phil. I'm Phil Wiedenheft here to introduce you to my co-host, Mr. Tom Bond. Each week, Tom and I, we get together to chat about how our days have been going, and together we work through our thoughts on what's going on in pop culture. This week's been a fucking doozy. It has actually given us some reason to hope in regards to last week's kind of shit show of a week. Since we last recorded, the 4 officers have all been arrested in the death of George Floyd, and thanks to an independent autopsy that was requested by his family, the charges against the officer, Derek Chauvin, the one who kneeled on his neck, were upgraded from 3rd degree to 2nd degree murder. And the rioting and looting has almost completely disappeared, but what has thankfully remained has been daily protests in cities across every state in the country, marking the largest single week of civil rights movements since the mid-60s. And some historians have even said that the size of these events and the breadth of ages, races, and classes have all expanded since an earlier era. So that's amazing development, an amazing expanse of the voices who are contributing to this movement. And that movement has led to the development of the Minneapolis City Council saying it will disband the police force. It's going to focus its funding now on alternative programs. More details of that are going to come soon, but that move helped spark the hashtag defund the police this week, leading to what is now brewing to be the first major reckoning this country has had with itself in regard to policing and systematic oppression. And it's an incredible movement that proves that protests are working. So that plus a major touchstone of the week was the painting of Black Lives Matter on Washington Street in bright yellow street paint. The lettering is so big it can be read by satellites. This move was approved of by D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, who is a black woman leading a city that is 50% black, showing support for her community as well as spitting on the asshole who lives a few blocks away. And she even went as far as renaming that 16th Street stretch where the mural is to Black Lives Matter Plaza. All of this was met with anger and controversy from police unions and the president, who has been angry, and it's been wonderful watching get progressively more angry at these types of taunts. That president unfortunately spent the week holding a Bible, not his Bible, to quote him, upside down while somehow offending every single person in just one moment. In that moment, he used tear gas and smoke bombs to clear out a crowd of peaceful protesters and journalists so that he could just make a walk across the street to St. John's Church for a photo op. While there, he offered no words of support, no guidance, no prayers, and no discernible reason for why he was actually there. The move offended journalists and peaceful protesters everywhere, as well as criticism from Christian conservatives who viewed him using the Bible as a prop as somehow the first and only offensive thing he's ever done. Other shit has happened, but we've got a lot to talk about. And with all that going on and more, Tom, how's that day?
Congratulations! 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 Congratulations!
On?
That opening.
Oh.
And I'm quoting the end of Neon Genesis. Spoiler alert.
Oh, yeah.
That was fantastic. I love these intros, Phil. Like I was telling you, you got to do these every week now, even if there's no news to report, even if it's you had a good bowel movement.
I suspect there will always be news to report.
Yes, but hopefully not as intense as these last couple of weeks. Although if we get the positive outcome, like you said, protests work, even riots work. Sometimes protests turn violent, and it's a sad state of it, but we aren't the people being oppressed day in and day out for years, for decades, for generations. It's not really up to us to say how they protest. I'm happy the rioting and the violence has ceased or almost ceased entirely. But it obviously works. It works. That's how the Civil Rights Bill was eventually passed into law in the 1960s after a week of rioting. 2nd-degree murder charges for Derek... Chauvin? Who gives a fuck? I don't care how his last name's pronounced. Upgraded to 2nd-degree murder charges, which is great. The Black Lives Matter street art and the changing of the street right outside the White House is just such a chef's kiss.
He can see it from the window, apparently.
Of course he can. It's right on 16th Street, man. It's such a nice. I mean, ultimately, it's a move that, symbolically is nice. I've seen varying responses from people who are very moved by it and think it's great, to who just kind of laugh and say like, "Oh, that fucker in the White House has to look at that now," to others saying, yeah, let's not celebrate this. This means nothing in the long run, you know? And I think all of those responses are valid.
I'm curious if it's in the
Um,
long run like a permanent fixture, if it will remain a permanent fixture there. I think that will matter more, especially if it's only there for a week. Then no, it won't matter that much. But
well, the renaming of the street better stick
better
around.
stay, yeah.
Yeah, that better stay. Artwork several blocks wide on a street that normally does not stay, so I would assume it's not going to last. But who knows?
I had a
Every day
suspicion.
it's up there is a good thing, I guess.
I could be wrong, but is that a block that most people don't drive down anyway? Like, you know how there's streets in Times Square where basically no one, only a few vehicles actually drive on there. They mostly kind of have people walking on them.
Right. I don't know.
We'll see. I don't know. I didn't know if it was like one of those promenade type things where people just walk in the street. I haven't been to DC in long enough.
Yeah, I would have to refamiliarize myself with exactly where it is. I've only been there a couple times and obviously don't know the specifics, but um, yeah, man, it's been a crazy week. We're recording this on a Monday, which is a little late for us. So if this podcast isn't out on Tuesday, I just want to say, on behalf of Phil and myself, sorry, because it is my fault. I delayed us a few days, but who knows? Phil's a fast editor. My week has been okay, dude. Um, it's been hectic. I didn't go to the large protest yesterday, unfortunately. I did go Friday to a memorial downtown LA at the Hall of Justice, a memorial for all of the black victims of police brutality. This one was specifically, ostensibly for the 600 plus black men and women who have been killed by police just in LA and just since 2012. But obviously, there were a lot of signs for George Floyd, and it would have been Breonna Taylor's birthday that day on Friday, so there were a lot of signs for her. There were a lot of signs about black trans lives, and a lot of very personal notes. So it was just basically 2 city blocks long, a mural of flowers along the sidewalk with some posters, signage, other memorials, and it was a very emotional scene, man. I gotta say, it was going on all day long. There was the LAPD office in downtown, and the City Hall district of downtown LA was right next door. So there was a protest happening a block away, and it's been very amazing to see the response. But it's just so fucking sad that this is the reason why people have to march, especially black people. I feel like when has this not been a need for them? Like we learn about it in
Yeah,
in history and civics classes in school, and you see like the dogs and the fire hoses and the 1960s black and white news footage, and now this, and it's just insane.
I've been weirdly angrier this week in some respects because, or I should say frustrated, maybe not angry, and maybe for the wrong reason in terms of like, as someone who grew up very infatuated with black art, like for whatever, I don't know why. But like I liked hip hop music when I was young, and Boys in the Hood was on HBO all the time growing up, and I watched that type of shit, and I've just kind of grown up immersed in it, and I think that maybe clued me in more than I think people who maybe aren't into the culture as much. That was kind of my gateway as a suburban middle class white boy, was always through art and through reading and through documentaries and such. That was kind of where I got most of my understanding from, plus a little bit of just, like you said in earlier episodes, we've both lived in major cities and had to be around kind of more eclectic groups at different points in our life. And so there has been a little bit of frustration on my part in hearing from people and talking to people, like where I am simultaneously glad that they are having this kind of awakening, but I'm also kind of like, how did you not realize this is literally all they've been talking about for 100 years? Like fucking every rapper from Jay-Z to Puff Daddy to every, you have your Roots and your Malcolm X's and your oppression and your Rodney Kings, and you have whatever facet of like art you want to dive into. It's like all they've been talking about, and all they've been, not all, but like it's a major factor that it has been a driving force in that kind of art form. And I have been a little frustrated with people who are like, "Oh my God, can you believe this is going on?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I can," And it's been a weird week in that I am very happy, but also shocked and frustrated by white people who I didn't realize how much of a blind eye they'd turned to some of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Ignorance is bliss. Especially we both ended up moving to larger cities, New York and LA specifically, and we both lived up in East Harlem in New York. LA, is obviously pretty diverse all over, minus a few of the richer neighborhoods, which neither of us live in. But yeah, even if you're a sheltered suburban white boy like you and I both are, if you're someone who's a child of the 80s, 90s up to now, basically since the advent of hip hop and the international broadening of the NBA, I think those two things, which happened in the 80s and 90s, really extended black culture to the suburbs and to the sheltered white kids like me growing up in a suburb outside of Boston, or you growing up in central Ohio. It really allowed black culture to enter our homes. I know that was true for me. Like I had one black friend as a kid, as a young boy, and then I had one black friend in high school. And it wasn't until I moved out of my hometown that I met more people that weren't white,
Yeah.
and befriended more people that weren't white. But I always had Michael Jordan on my TV. I loved hip hop just like you did. I bought the VHS of Clockers when I was 10 years old and trying to understand what film nerddom was. And I think those things when you're a little kid, I hope that they ingrain in you an understanding of, just a fundamental understanding of what's the difference between you and them,
And just,
like Michael Jordan and Michael Jackson, but they were like my heroes as a kid, and they were both black guys, and it wasn't even a consideration in my head that they were black. It wasn't until later when you're kind of taught the differences that stuff can seep in insidiously, and it is insidious. And you say, you talk to so many people who don't understand that it's been a problem, and it comes from genuine ignorance. And I think there's a lot of talk going on right now since there has become, the protests have been so overwhelming. I really credit the new generation, the millennial generation. We saw it after the Parkland shooting in Florida. The turnout, we're seeing it right now with these protests. Everyone likes to shit on millennials and call them fragile. These kids show up and they care. They're so socially engaged. And I find it super impressive and inspiring. And I think they're this generation that, as culture in all facets, sports, entertainment, music, as it's become so centralized on the internet and access is everywhere and you can get it from every source no matter where you live, everything has kind of leveled out, I feel like. And I see younger kids who, the idea of these biases that are ingrained in our culture for so many generations, that are taught to us as we were isolated and on our own in different neighborhoods and after white flight going out to the suburbs, all of that seems to be crumbling a little bit.
Well,
younger people, and it's really inspiring to see.
Yeah, I mean, you hope that we talk so much about streaming and stuff, but like this week alone, I know I made some recommendations on Instagram, and I've seen a lot of other people who are just like, look, if you don't know about this stuff, there's information out there, and it's easier than ever to access those films. And like Shell had never seen, like I said, I'm a film nerd who sees a lot of stuff right away, and it's always been important to me. So like a lot of stuff that was recommended this week, like 13th or I Am Not Your Negro or Selma or these other kind of black created products that explain the black experience in America. I'd already seen those, but watching other people who maybe had thought like, oh, that's a heavy subject. Like, I don't know if I want to pay attention to that. It's been interesting watching them this week, kind of being like, okay, I'll open up my ears and listen and tune into those things. And it's nice that now, especially compared to like the 90s or something where someone might have had to go to Blockbuster and rent Roots or something like that. Now it's like, no, just watch 13th. It's an hour, it's 80 minutes of your time or something. Like, just pull it up on Netflix. It's right there. And same with some of these other films that are really important and will help you understand. So I think it helps with the availability of things to put the impetus on the person and the individual. Because at this point, you can't say like the information isn't out there. If you want to find out and you're curious, like there's so much out there. Go look. There's a lot of recommendations everywhere on the internet right now. But yeah, I, as two white boys who grew up middle class and not knowing personally many black people, maybe having one or two throughout school and high school, you know, it's invaluable. So they're through their art, I have found, you know, who knows how much information or perspective or understanding, and just trying to understand through their voices. So couldn't recommend it.
Yeah,
couldn't recommend it enough. And next week we're going to be talking about Spike Lee and his films, and he was a filmmaker who had a huge impact on me throughout basically our entire life. He's the director of Clockers, which you just mentioned, and Do the Right Thing was certainly mentioned a lot. Radio Raheem, it was mentioned a lot this week, and yeah, we're going to talk a lot of Spike next week, so get ready for that.
Get ready for that. I will never forget Phil with his cookies on his belly, watching Do the Right Thing with him, visiting Phil in Ohio.
Yeah. Hey man, watching it with motion smoothing while I was stoned out of my mind, and
yeah, and I had to call it out, and you're like, I don't even notice.
I was like, well, I'm pretty high, you know, I don't know.
That was back when Phil was stoned and had a belly and didn't notice motion.
Oh, dude,
smoothing.
I've got a belly now. I'm both. I've been looking at the reopening stuff in LA with a lot of intrigue and questions, because they're saying like gyms can open this Friday, and I'm like, okay, but like how? What are the restrictions? You know, like I'm so curious. I even saw the Hollywood Reporter reported today that they might be opening movie theaters by this Friday or next Friday, depending on the.
Wow.
So yeah, I just saw that like right before we were recording. The Hollywood Reporter is like, in order to be ready for like Tenet and stuff next week, they're going to be starting to open with 75% capacity, not even 50. They're saying like either if you have less than 100, it's based on how many chairs or seats you have in the auditorium, but it's either 75% capacity or less than 100 people or something like that. And I'd have to go pull it up to reread it. But yeah, I've been looking at that at gyms. Haircuts are opening here this week, so I've been thinking a lot like, okay, what am I willing to risk? What am I going to do? Am I going to go see? There's nothing out in theaters that I need to go see this week, so I don't know that I'm rushing out to that. But you know, I wouldn't mind a haircut, and I am getting a belly, and I wouldn't mind a trip to the gym. I really do miss the gym quite a bit, but it's like, are they gonna only let you use certain numbers of equipment versus like can't use the sauna? You know, I don't know yet. So that's where my head's been at this week of like, it seems like everyone's ready to move on from the virus, but we can't yet. You know, it's like, it's still here, guys. We're not post-pandemic.
Although, did you see? So I wanted to go back to the protest, but since we're on this subject now, I'll talk about these two news stories that popped up today. So New Zealand, the last known case of the COVID-19 coronavirus, the novel coronavirus, the worst book of all time. The last known case in New Zealand was medically cleared today. So as far as the government knows, there are no cases of the coronavirus in that country right now, which is a great thing. It's a great milestone.
Yes. Much smaller country, much more liberal,
yes,
progressive healthcare. Yeah, very interesting.
The other news story which made the rounds today, which blew my mind, the World Health Organization, WHO, the organization that is essential to our understanding, to medical advancement, to education and treatment all around the world, that Donald Trump wants to stop giving money to on behalf of America. The WHO came out today and said that asymptomatic carriers of this virus, it is very rare that they can infect other people, that they can spread this disease to others. Did you see that story?
Yeah, well, yeah, you sent it to me. I don't think I replied, but yeah, I think I didn't click the story, but I saw the headline and I was like, oh, well, that's curious. I guess I'm still kind of in that like, well, no one knows anything really just yet, so I guess I'm just not going to get my hopes up.
I am not going to celebrate and say that solves everything. But from what I understand, from what I've seen from this story, this is obviously based off of, at this point, several months worth of data that they've been able to track. Obviously, the best way to capture and kill this disease is testing and then contact tracing, right? You find out who's sick, and then you find out who they've been in contact with and which one of them are sick and who they've been in contact with, and so on and so forth. You play chainmail with it. But obviously there are asymptomatic carriers, some of whom just ended up getting tested because, their country had an abundance of tests and were very on the ball with it, meaning not Americans, or they just happened to get a test in a city that allowed it, like LA is doing now. You don't need to have symptoms if you want to go get tested, and they find out they're sick even though they didn't feel sick, or players like when Rudy Gobert of the NBA found out that he had the coronavirus, and they did contact tracing and they found several other players who had been in contact with him who also had the coronavirus. None of those guys ended up having symptoms. The other players who found out that they were sick. So I guess, there are asymptomatic cases that they know about. So through studying all of that data, they've come to the conclusion that it's very unlikely asymptomatic carriers can spread the disease. Like, they didn't say it's impossible. And obviously things keep changing and changing. But as we get deeper and deeper into this virus, we're now a full, half a year into this thing. When you consider the outbreak, which started in late 2019, that's why it's the COVID-19 case. They have much more data now than they did at the end of March, when there was still a debate over should we wear masks or not. Can you get it from touching a wall that another person has touched? Like, they're very further along with their understanding of this disease, how it mutates, how it spreads. So to me, this is I'm very, very cautiously optimistic about this news, because I believe the guesstimate that I see floating around the most is they believe about 30% of the people infected are asymptomatic. About 3 out of 10, a little under 1/3. If that chunk, which is the hardest chunk to find, to locate and isolate, can even spread the disease, that's a dramatic drop-off you're going to end up seeing of new cases coming in. And maybe that's why when the cases started dropping a couple of weeks ago, just use America for an example, we're seeing protests over the past week and change. Places like Vegas now are completely opened up again. Like, if you look at the casinos in Vegas,
yeah, that's insane.
It looks like 2018 or something.
Yeah,
it's nuts. But if there are no spikes in cases in the next 10 to 15 days, considering
all the
casinos in Vegas, considering the protests all around the country, then maybe there's a lot of truth to this story.
Hopefully.
And maybe I think herd immunity, I don't want to call it bullshit, but this early in the game, I think there's no way. But maybe that's a big reason. Maybe the asymptomatic, younger folk who aren't getting sick off of this, maybe they can't really spread it. Maybe they can catch it from someone who's sick, and that's it. That would be amazing.
Well,
it would be amazing.
It would be nice. I guess my whole thing would just still be one, for those on especially like Trump's side who would be celebrating, like, see, we told you. Well, right now there's still 113,000 deaths in the U.S. alone from this disease or this virus. So it's not as if it wasn't an emergency or wasn't like people overreacted. I think there's going to be some Monday morning quarterbacking next year about like who reacted when and how based on what we knew. And some people are going to be like, oh, we'll see so-and-so overreacted. And it's going to be like, well, we didn't really know. And as we figured these things out. So that on top of the fact that we are entering the summer months and doctors have said like, we don't know what the summer months are going to do versus the, fall, once that starts coming around again. There's still not a vaccine. There's not going to be a vaccine for at least another year. So I want to be cautiously optimistic. Like, hopefully this is true. Absolutely, 100%. I would love to get back to a normal life and knowing that it's not as an extreme a virus as we maybe initially suspected. But yeah, man, there's still been so many deaths compared to any other thing in American history or any other virus in American history. And I hope people don't take this good news, if it is in fact true, as a kind of victory lap to kind of say like, well, see, scientists were wrong when they first started telling us to put masks on, or use it as a way to, denounce the scientists who were still trying to figure it out. That's kind of my fear, and that seems to be what happens when things get politicized on Twitter and everywhere else these days.
I mean, I'll take those idiots claiming some dumb victory, even though over 100,000 people in America have already died, if it means this story's true. I'd rather this story be true and let them pretend that they're right.
Well, yeah, and it's the same as the job numbers right now. Like Trump literally did like a mission accomplished, like triumphant multiple press conference about the job numbers, and it's like, dude, those aren't permanent newly created jobs. Those are people returning back to their jobs after shutdowns and stuff. So like, there's still 3 times the number of unemployed people than there were when you started your presidency. So let's calm the fuck down a little bit.
Trump's a fucking moron. We know that.
Yeah, we don't need to talk about him. He just makes us upset.
Well, I do want to. So going back to what you were saying about being immersed in Black culture and really loving Black culture, as you know, people who know me know I'm a giant NBA fan, and Jalen Rose, former NBA player and current ESPN commentator and analyst for the NBA, had a great quote last week about that entire situation. And it touches on our childhood a lot and a lot of people like us. And he said, I wish America loved Black people the way they loved Black culture. And to me, that was the most succinct way of explaining the blinders that so many people have. Not even the out racists out there. That's a whole other subsection of America that's unfortunately too big of a subsection. But just like you said, the people who were blissfully ignorant because they live in their white privilege, perhaps unwittingly, And I think that's what a lot of the conversations have been about the past week is, Phil, you were saying earlier, you were getting frustrated at some of your seemingly well-intentioned people who apparently had no idea that this was still going on and it was such an epidemic. Beyond the fact of like, well, what do you think the Colin Kaepernick protests were about?
Yeah.
And
it's like,
why do you think there's such a turnout? I think there's a lot of discussion, especially, you and I can only talk as white people and the white experience. I would never assume to talk about how Black people are feeling about this. But I think a lot of the discussion among whites or allies in this scenario is, we now have to, if you haven't been doing it before, you have to be active. You can no longer be passive about this. You can no longer be a passive supporter and leave it at that. You can no longer say you're not racist. That's a passive behavior. You have to be anti-racist, because if you're not anti-racist, then you are enabling racists. That's like saying, I don't support Trump, but I'm not going to vote against him. A vote that's not being used against Trump is a vote for Trump. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Staying silent, it just can't happen anymore. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done that allies can do for this movement and this fight for change and social justice. And it's about unlearning what we've learned. I think American school systems failed white people just like they've failed Black people in so many more ways. The show Watchmen, that brilliant show that just came out, a lot of it, a big story point is the Tulsa riots.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot
100 years ago.
I've been thinking a lot about Watchmen this week, actually.
Those Tulsa riots, I never learned in school.
No,
never.
Apparently,
I never learned that in school.
Apparently, according to Damon Lindelof, learning about them was one of the sparks of the show. He was like, once again, like you said, I was never taught that. How have I never heard about this event in American history? And that, which for those who have seen the show, that is the first episode of the movie or of the show, is this Tulsa riot / massacre, whatever you want to call it, and. Yeah, so he even said, like, as a white person who created that show, learning about that and wondering why he wasn't taught that and how much of that show is crazy prescient right now, like with the police officers who have to wear masks because it's so dangerous to be a police officer, and so everyone's wearing masks throughout the show, and the like yellow lettering that look like basically the
Yep.
Black Lives Matter lettering going down Washington Street looks like the lettering for Watchmen, and
It might as well have said "Who watches the Watchmen."
and it's been a weird week for that show where like that came out last year where you're like, man, that show it was 6 months ahead of time, like in a crazy way.
Yeah. So for those who don't know about it, I'm gonna just very briefly summarize it because I guarantee someone out there is white and listening to this and does not know what I'm talking about. The Tulsa race riots happened in a town, uh, in a community in Oklahoma that was known as Black Wall Street, and it was a thriving community of black men, women, and children, black families, black businessmen. And there was an altercation that took place between a member of that community and a white guy who was not a member of the community, who was part of a nearby community, and a large group of white people raided the town and burned it down. And they know that minimum 35 black people were killed in that massacre. They think the number could be as high as 300. And they basically just turned the place into a ghost town. They demolished it. They killed women, children, men. It was a complete, it was just a racial annihilation is what it was. And that is such a major story. And I I went to school from K through 12th grade. I went to college. I have a degree. I took history classes. I took civics classes. I took political science classes. I was never taught that in school. So I think there's a lot of unlearning what we've been learned. I think there's a lot of understanding that we are born with not only inherent white privilege, but inherent white supremacy, because that's the system that we are raised in. Just because we are white and born into white supremacy does not make you a racist necessarily. Not every white person yields their white supremacy against others, but we are unwittingly a part of that system, whether we want to be or not, whether we're for or against it. And because of that reality, that I think a lot of people are learning, and it's super uncomfortable to talk about and to learn. It is. It's just, it's awkward as fuck, but it's the type of work white people have to do because we can learn about racism and being anti-racists, right? We can sit at home and learn about it and educate ourselves, but black people don't have that luxury. They learn it by existing. And that's the difference, and that's the inherent systemic problem that we have. So I think it's on us as white people to educate ourselves, to be better, to be allies, and to be active. And yeah, passivity is no longer it's no longer okay. I mean, it never was, but
Yeah, so
it really is not now. It officially is not. It's a decree. How's that day pod fully endorses no more passivity forever and ever.
that's right. Silence is violence. And on that note, kind of, I guess, blending with the news of this week and the first topic that we're going to dive into, one of the other events that happened this week was that the rapper Killer Mike gave a press conference in Atlanta, which is incredibly emotional and powerful. And in that speech, he gives the black community at the kind of the heights of the rioting and the looting of last week, he gives them words of encouragement. And I would encourage everyone to watch the video in its entirety. It's about 8 minutes long. In it, he encourages them not to burn their houses down, but he tells them he would rather them shelter people in their houses and use the time that they have to plot, plan, mobilize, and strategize, as he says multiple times in the video. And Killer Mike is a rapper slash political activist slash spokesman and all around incredible rapper. And one of the things we want to talk about this week, jumping right into it, RTJ4, Run the Jewels, a black man and a white man who create hip hop that is politically minded and very much about this time. And they released an album earlier this week. They released it early, a couple days early, because it was just so about what we were talking about this week. So with that said, let me drop a track right now of Run the Jewels from RTJ4.
Mastered economics, cause you took yourself from squalor. Slave. Mastered academics, cause your grace said you a scholar. Slave. Mastered Instagram, cause you can instigate a follow. Shit. Look at all these slave masters posing on your dollar. Get it? Yeah.
Look at all these slave masters posing on your dollar.
Get it?
Look at all these slave masters posing on your dollar.
Get it?
Look at all these slave masters posing on your dollar.
Get it?
Look at all these slave masters. Hey, Bennett time, I'm on mine.
All right, so Run the Jewels. RTJ4, the album, is the obviously fourth collaboration between producer, beatmaker, and rapper LP, alongside his political activist and one of the best rappers alive, Killer Mike. Each album is full of aggressive, high-energy hip-hop beats that I would say mix a lot of techno influences. They're pretty bass-heavy, but it's still very rock at times. They frequently collaborate with Zach De La Roca, who's of Rage Against the Machine, and they were even supposed to tour with Rage Against the Machine this year before Corona kind of canceled everything. But they're a rap group in the Rage tradition of mixing aggressive, kind of like fuck yeah, pump your fist type of music with political commentary. And the pair of rappers, they usually trade off verses throughout every song. They often mix political, angry commentary with calls for uprising, and that's all kind of mixed with vulgar and childish humor and some other pretty hilarious moments throughout. And this latest album was recorded before the events of the previous couple weeks, but they dropped it early, and I think they knew that people needed to hear what they recorded. And what they recorded is so prescient about what we're seeing in the news and hearing about every day in their lyrics and what they're talking about. They couldn't have been more prepared for this moment and have exactly what everyone wants to hear right now. That angry mix of political and angry feeling is mixed with enough levity, I think, to make you want to keep listening. Not to mention, plus, if you're like a hip hop fan, the flows and the beats. So, yeah, we'll dive into individual tracks and stand up verses that really touch on the political moment. But Tom, tell me about Run the Jewels. Were you a big fan before? And what was your reaction to hearing this album?
I'm a huge fan of Run the Jewels. I think, in terms of collaboration, I think they're maybe the best thing going in hip hop for me.
Yeah, probably.
I really enjoy the couple of albums that Madlib and Freddie Gibbs have put out, but Run the Jewels it's special. They have a very effortless quality to their albums. That, like you said, this is their fourth one now, but first one in a while. Run the Jewels 3 came out in late 2016. So it's been a couple of years, so it's nice to have them back, but I think they are just one of the most purely consistent hip-hop acts of the last decade. All four albums are great. It's just varying degrees of great if you want to pick your favorites out.
Yeah, they're all they're really tight, like 12 track-ish, like 45-ish minute albums that are just incredibly, like you said, tight and consistent. That's definitely a word there.
They both guys, LP and Killer Mike, each take a verse or two each on pretty much every track. They have a lot of great guest stars that now that they're up to their fourth album, they've seen some repeat customers. You mentioned Zach. They have Gangsta Boots has been on a couple albums. This album had 2 Chainz. It had Pharrell Williams. They get some really great artists to collaborate with them. But yeah, I'm a huge Run the Jewels fan. I was super excited for this album. They released it 2 days early, like you said. I think smartly so. And before anyone wants to call it, cynically call it a calculated move or something to capitalize on Killer Mike's speech and the movement, first off, how dare you? But secondly, they released this album for free on their website. It's not like they're not trying to cash in on police brutality or anything like that. And you see it in the lyrics. And it's not like Run the Jewels 4 is a new direction for them where they're suddenly talking about these issues. This is par for the course for Run the Jewels. They're very politically minded, socially conscious, aware, specifically about police brutality, about black violence. Killer Mike in particular, who grew up as a drug dealer, is very outspoken about the tendency in hip hop to glamorize the drug game, and he talks about it. You mentioned that they have some, they can have some goofy lyrics about like sex, drugs, violence, and stuff. But, in general, when Killer Mike is really on point talking about serious issues when he wants to. He very openly condemns that lifestyle and talks about how we're hip hop is sending the wrong message to young black kids in terms of glamorizing drug dealing on the street and shit like that. So I think they're a great group to root for and to like. They make it very easy to like them because they're so talented. LP as a producer, both of them as rappers and lyricists, but the message they put out, the sense of fun that they have, the re-listenability of their tracks, and yeah, Killer Mike's activism. They're just, what's not to like? And personally, I have listened to all 4 of their albums many, many times. And I like all 4 a lot. I was actually on a big Run the Jewels kick for like a month leading up to this album, just getting excited for it. But I have listened to Run the Jewels 4, I think it's been out for less than a week, right? It's been out for like 4 days or something. And I think I have listened to this album front to back 15 times, maybe. I can't stop listening to it. I think it is my favorite album of theirs. I think we both raved about Fiona Apple earlier this year. And I still very much love Fetch the Bolt Cutters. I think it's instant classic. This may be my new favorite album of the year. It's close, but it's definitely one of those two. I think this is their masterwork. A couple tracks in particular and a couple verses within those tracks to be even more particular. What do you think, Phil?
Yeah, I like you said, they've been so consistent that it's been hard for me to just kind of instantly declare that this is the best because, well, the fucking 1, 2, and 3 are amazing.
It's not instant, to be fair. 15 times in 5 days.
Yeah.
I've been listening to it a lot.
Yeah. It's an easy listen. Like we said, it's only 11 songs, 40 minutes, and they're all pretty upbeat, energetic songs. So it's, they kind of fly by. They're all around 3 to 4 minutes long. They're not super long tracks. And they're an easy, fun listen. I've listened to them for years for a variety of reasons, both because they're like politically engaging, the production by LP is incredible, but also just like as someone who likes to run at the gym, like they're just so fucking, it gets you jazzed, man. It gets you energetic. It makes you want to pump your fist. And yeah, I've been a huge fan for years. I saw them, I think I even mentioned this since we've been back recording, but I saw them one of the first tour stops of RTJ3. And I just remember it was so early that they had not memorized all the lyrics yet. So like there was multiple songs where like, oops, sorry. And they had to like apologize and kind of like restart. And that show was still one of the most incredible shows I've ever seen. It was so high energy, so fucking just like the entire room was shaking. I was on the balcony and there were bleachers, like metal bleachers kind of lining the balcony that everyone was on. And everyone had beer. There was multiple bars in this place. There was even a bar upstairs next to the balcony, so everyone had quick access to liquor. And I just remember everyone on these bleachers just shaking throughout these songs, and beer was being spilled everywhere to the point that it felt like everyone was just like on this slippery metal like slide, kind of just like holding on to one another as we just jumped up and down and rocked out to this music. It's such kind of, there's a anger and a release that is in it that comes from the political stuff, but just also the production. And like you said, none of this political stuff is new. There's lyrics on RTJ2 with Zach De La Rocha of Rage Against the Machine, like, when you guys gonna unite and kill those police motherfuckers? Like he's been talking about rising up against the police for years now, and this is not new ground for them. And they're just, I think, the right album at the right moment, and it's incredibly, especially, I guess we can dive into some actual tracks, but like when I heard the second verse of Walking in the Snow, my jaw hit the floor, Mike's verse on that, because, I guess I'll play that right now. I'll just play Mike's verse so people can hear what he says.
Play the whole thing. Just play the whole thing.
There's...
from Mike's...
I was going to say there's copyright things, but okay, I'll play what I can. All right, here we go.
Gangsta boo, run the jewels. We back on our shit, and it's cold as fuck.
The way I see it, you probably free is from the ages 1 to 4. Around the age of 5, you shipped away from your body to be stored. They promise education, but really they give you tests and scores. And they predicting prison population by who's scoring the lowest. And usually the lowest scores the poorest, and they look like me. And every day on the evening news, they feed your fear for free. And you so numb, you watch the cops choke out a man like me. Until my voice goes from a shriek to whisper, I can't breathe. And you sit there in house on couch and watch it on TV. The most you give is a Twitter rant and call it a tragedy. But truly the travesty, you've been robbed of your empathy, replaced it with apathy. I wish I could magically fast forward the future so then you can face it and see how fucked up it'll be. I promise I'm honest, they coming.
All right, so that was Walking in the Snow. That was just an example of some of the lyrics, and as you can hear in that speech or in that verse, he's using quotes like "I can't breathe," and it really, I think, makes you, the listener, realize, one, that he did not record this a week ago. He recorded this months ago, and this is not about this first death of George Floyd. This is about many years of deaths, and deaths that have had the exact same quotes, like "I can't breathe," in reference to Eric Garner. And it was just one of those staggering moments. I don't know if it was a verse that stood out to you right away on your first listen or if you came across it later, but I think on my first listen that was one of the verses that instantly kind of just smacked me across the face in terms of just thinking, wow, this album's special and unique, or the right.
Yeah, that album, or I'm sorry, that verse from Walking in the Snow, I think is if you had to pick one singular standout, one thing this album's going to be remembered for, it's that Killer Mike track. I think that's what I love about both these guys, and I think LP, he's a great producer. I think he is somehow, because Killer Mike is so great, I think LP is very underrated as a lyricist. He's fantastic.
He's gotten better too, I think.
Yeah, he is. There are a couple tracks here that he's clearly the standout in my opinion. Not Walking in the Snow, but in a lot of them, like even leading up to Walking in the Snow, Goonies versus E.T., he's got maybe his best verse in the entire album. But Walking in the Snow, Killer Mike, part of his talent is that he can change his flow and his tempo. He can rap really fast. He can slow things down. He's got a lot of melody inside him, just naturally. And you can tell that this is a very meaningful verse for him because of the way it starts. It's very pronounced and slow, and like really trying to get your attention. Like, I'm trying to tell you something here.
Here, I'll read,
talking about from the ages 1 to 4.
Yeah, I'll read it really quickly and not try to emphasize like the rap of it. But the way I see it, you're probably freest from ages 1 to 4. Around the age of 5, you're shipped away for your body to be stored. They promise education, but they give you tests and scores, and they're predicting prison populations by who's scoring the lowest. And usually the lowest scores the poorest, and they look like me, and every day on the evening news they feed you fear for free. And he keeps going on. I already played it, but yeah, it's this very political notion of like, as soon as you're a kid, it's inundated from you, and it's this school to prison pipeline that's going on. And yeah, he tackles so much in just a few verses.
Yeah, this is my philosophy. This is what I've come to understand about what it's like to live in America as a black person. And I noticed a website that I go to a lot, or the app that I go to a lot is the Genius Lyric app on my phone a lot of times, especially when I'm listening to new music, because they obviously have the lyrics, but they also have little annotations sometimes from the artists themselves. Like if you've gone and looked up the Hamilton, the musical, the lyrics on Genius, Lin-Manuel Miranda's quotes are all over that, which is super cool. So anyway, I was doing that on a couple listens of this album, and I just happened to go on the Genius, the front page of the app on Saturday, and Walking in the Snow was the number 1 trending song there. So it's clearly hitting a lot of people, not just us. That, I think, it's basically all about, as great as Killer Mike's verses as well, it's really all about that, or as great as LP's verses on that track, it's really all about Killer Mike's message there. I think it's really hitting home. There are other songs where they're very topical and they're tackling social issues and injustices that they're seeing, but this one in particular is just so exactly on point and for the moment. And an interesting thing, so as Phil knows, and I think I've mentioned it in previous episodes since we've come back, I've been starting to do deep dives on different artists. Been getting into like listening to their studio albums front to back. I did REM, and then I just finished doing U2. I started with those two in particular because Scott Aukerman and Adam Scott have a podcast where they go through the albums of both of those artists, right? So I was re-listening to this episode where they end up getting all four members of U2 to sit down and talk to them for like an hour and a half. And it's a wide-ranging discussion. It's really funny and enlightening because it's two fans interviewing them, not journalists or something like that. So I highly recommend it. It's called You Talking U2 to Me, if anyone wants to check out the podcast. But in the episode where they interview the band, they get on to talking about Sunday Bloody Sunday at one point. And, Bono's talking a lot about the genesis of the song and how it was a protest song. And I forget which of the Scots, the host, asks him, it's kind of a shame you don't see that many protest songs being written in America right now. And this was back in like late 2015. So I don't even know if Trump had announced his candidacy. I'd have to look at the date, but it's like basically right before Trump came over and took the country over, unfortunately. And Bono starts talking about, I feel that tide shifting. People are really frustrated right now. A lot of people seem to be losing hope. And I feel like, you had Pussy Riot overseas. I think you're going to see something like that happen in America. And I think it's going to happen pretty soon. And I think in particular it's going to happen in hip hop. I think hip hop is going to bring back the protest song. I feel it coming. He's like, I have no reason to believe that other than it's just a feeling that I have. And he was absolutely right. Like when you look at what Run the Jewels has been putting out the last several years, and then you look at songs like Meek Mill just put out a song this week that directly has a Donald Trump quote to lead it off, like him saying to black people, what do you have to lose? Your unemployment sucks. No one takes care of you. What do you have to lose by voting for me? And it ends with Meek Mill on CNN talking about his life, and you would have a gun too if you had to deal with the shit I had to deal with. Or you have like the song of 2018 was "This Is America."
I was just about to mention that, and
but yeah, Bono was totally right. Like the hip hop right now is where we're going to find the protest song and the song that's like speaking to America and its ills, and it's really cool. I mean, it sucks that the reason why it's had to come back, although that's a reason that's been around for decades, like we touched about. But it's really cool that guys like Childish Gambino and Meek Mill and Killer Mike and LP are leading that charge. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, it's not like it was in the 60s or 70s or something where you're going to have like, we're not going to have John Mayer write a protest song that like moves the nation, or these like...
I mean, he may write it, but it's not going to move the nation.
Compared to like This Is America or something, This Is America is essentially the blown in the wind of our generation or something. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not going to sound like how it used to sound. The protest songs are going to be different, but yeah, it's not going to be white guys with acoustic guitars singing softly about how we can all come together. It's going to be probably angrier, probably a little bit more, like you said, hip hop, a little bit more modern. It's going to be different. So it's going to be
danceable.
Yeah, or something.
I mean, Bruce Springsteen can try to write one, or Neil Young. People will be like, "Oh, that's really cute."
Well, I was actually speaking of Bruce. I was actually listening earlier this week to a song that he released in 1999. I'm going to have to look up who the victim was, but the song is called "American Skin 41 Shots." And it's not a song...
I was just reading about that song on the old Wikipedia.
Yeah. It's a song that it was on his Essential, the Essential Bruce Springsteen, which was like a 3-disc album that I had in high school. And that was how I kind of really first got into it. But it first appeared on some live stuff. It was never on an album. And basically the song is 41 shots, and it's about how... the chorus is it a gun? Is it a knife? Is it a wallet? This is your life. And it's about these police who this man was pulling out his wallet. They thought he was pulling out a gun, a black man, obviously, and they shot him 41 times. And it was about even if he did have a gun, 41 times seems a bit excessive, guys. And that was clearly...
Even if he had a rocket.
Yeah, it's like 41, it's excessive. And so this song is about basically you can get killed living in your American skin and getting shot 41 times. And it's a song he wrote in 1999. And there were like security problems at Madison Square Garden because the NYPD thought he had attacked them, and they wouldn't do security for his shows and stuff like that because he had written the song that was in some way critical of the actions of them. So it's all been going on for so long, but it is curious to see where the protest song heads. I don't think Bruce Springsteen's going to be, I'm sure he'll keep writing them, as you said, but we'll see what the youth of the nation actually attaches itself to.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's clearly hip-hop's paving the way for the future, which it has for a few decades now. And it's amazing when you look at a band like Run the Jewels, especially guys like, LP's been around for 20 years.
Same with Killer Mike. He was another,
Yeah, like, they were both around in the, like, Killer Mike was around at the beginning of Outkast.
Yeah.
LP was around with Biggie in Brooklyn.
They're both in their 40s.
Yeah, they're two fatties who have who have been around for decades and are really in an authoritative position within that genre to pick up the torch. And it's really cool that they're doing that because, they had already proved their first record came out in 2013, right? 2012, 2013, something like that. Their first Run the Jewels record, I mean. And they didn't need to start this band. Like, neither of them needed that for their career. They were both super successful at that point. They had been in hip-hop for 15 years each at that point, even longer, I think. They've talked about it, and they've said, this was just a way for us to get together. We really liked working with each other. I know LP had produced some stuff for Killer Mike before, including one of Killer Mike's solo tracks. I think the album right before the first Run the Jewels, he has a track that LP produced called Reagan.
Yeah.
That if people haven't listened to, you have to check out the song. It's from his 2011 or 2012 album that the name I'm blanking on, unfortunately, but the track is called Reagan.
Yeah, it's called Rap Music, R-A-P Music.
Yes, that's right, R-A-P Music. The LP produced that, and then they ended up getting together with Run the Jewels. And I feel like, it kind of started as a way for them to dick around. If you listen to their first album, it's much more kind of goofy and fun and lighthearted, and it's their shortest record. It's only like half an hour. Like, it's almost EP quality in terms of length. And then Run the Jewels 2 comes out almost right away, a year later.
Yeah, 2 is really where I think 1 is probably, like you said, the least serious of the 4.
Yeah, 2 to me was my favorite up until, and like I said, the album's a week old. Who knows? My opinion may change, but 2 had always been my favorite personally. I think it's the best mix of, really fun. Like I said, they make hip hop music that manages to be very danceable. Like they just have great melodies. The production, the beats are fantastic, and the flow of both of them. They just have great inherent melodies. Like you can tell they both have rhythm. Fat guys normally do. Don't forget that, everybody.
That's right, Biggie, baby.
Yeah, I think their second album is when I really noticed them and were like, oh shit, this is awesome music. I was a fan of the first one, but I thought it was just going to be like a one-off vanity project or something.
Yeah, I'm the same. Second one, I think, is where most people started taking them seriously.
Yeah, like you mentioned that song with Zach, which is one of my favorite Run the Jewel tracks of any record.
Close your eyes and count to fuck.
Close your eyes and count to fuck. But that track has so many great tracks on it. Like Oh My Darling Don't Cry is great. All My Life, Light Sheet Steel, Early with Boots is so good. All Due Respect with Travis Barker. They bring Travis Barker on and it kicks ass. Love Again with Gangsta Boo is a fucking hilarious song. Angel Duster is this like epic track closer. I mean, I know they have a bonus track after it, but also just side note, they've done it since. I mean, I guess even the first track with that Christmas song. It's a Christmas fucking miracle.
Yeah, it's a
or
Christmas fucking miracle. Yeah.
No one else right now does a better closing track to an album than Run the Jewels.
Yeah, let's talk about this one, this sax-heavy epic called A Few Words for the Firing Squad.
Yeah, but so before we get into that completely, I think it would be an incomplete discussion to not talk about the final track of Run the Jewels 3, which is called A Report to the Shareholders / Kill Your Masters. So we've talked about all 3 albums, plus the first. The first one's like 30 minutes. The second one's just under 40. The latest is around 40. Run the Jewels 3 is the longest. It's a little over 50 minutes. But they're normally, every track is normally this like 3.5 minute range. They very rarely go over 4 minutes. But the last track of Run the Jewels 3 and RTJ 4 are both like pushing 7 minutes long, right? And they seem to be these very pointed codas about whatever in particular they've been wanting to talk about. So Run the Jewels 3, it ends with that song, A Message to the Shareholders / Kill Your Masters. It's like a 6.5 minute epic track. LP's talking about like, you know, the reason why they decided to get together. Like they were just going to hang out. They liked each other. They thought they'd have some laughs. They realized there was something more important that they could do with this group together. Like they could actually have a message and get it out there to people and be successful doing it. And it really, you know, Run the Jewels 3 throughout the album. Obviously they're talking about certain social issues, like police brutality is a big theme in Run the Jewels 3 as well. Like Killer Mike's past life and his basically like acknowledging the trauma he's dealt with as a drug dealer and how it doesn't go away. You know, like I was saying earlier, all the rappers who may glamorize being like a former dealer and getting out of it, now becoming a successful millionaire, is like, don't listen to that. Like, it's not glamorous and fun. Like, I have scars from it. And basically, the last track of that record is a message to the people listening. You know, it's not just black people who are slaves here. Basically, like we're all being held down by the power elite in this nation, right? So that's kind of the coda to Run the Jewels 3. So that theme comes back in the new record, which is another closing track. That's what does it feel like? 6.5, 7 minutes?
6:42.
Like 6:42. So that song is called A Few Words for the Firing Squad, in parentheses, Radiation. And just so I'm not hogging the conversation, why don't you take the baton and start talking about that one?
Well, yeah, it's you know, it like you were saying, it's a kind of final message, in some ways the most political, and it's also the most epic in terms of the soundscape. I think a lot of the songs on the record are very beat heavy, very kind of energetic. We've talked a lot about Rage Against the Machine and that kind of, I mentioned, you know, pump your fist type of music. This one is a saxophone. It's very atmospheric. It's kind of like, I don't know, like a noir or something like that. I don't know how to
Yeah. Well, it's, you know, their beats, even when they're talking about serious shit, their beats are generally pretty fun and uplifting, very upbeat. Both of these final tracks are kind of downer sounds. Like, they're not necessarily sad, but they're more like languid, you know? Like a saying goodbye type of sound.
Yeah, and it's both
sense.
of them reflecting on themselves personally and the future, and it's them trying, I think, to reckon with what's been going on for the last few years and where they want to go. And when I look at the lyrics, I see a lot of stuff. You know, there's a lot of pain in the track, and I think a lot of political pain, a lot of personal pain. I know that LP in particular has talked a lot about sobriety and getting sober, and I think that mixed with that kind of need for seeking an apology is a big part of LP's perspective on this, and Mike's anger at the political machinations of this entire country come through, and how that has affected the personal on top of the political. And it's just this, yeah, it's an epic track. Like we said, it's almost 7 minutes. It differentiates itself from the rest of the album in terms of complexity and also changing. You know, in terms of changing styles midway through, the track kind of shifts and has sketches and is very layered. Whereas most of the tracks are pretty simple. Like, you get the beat, you like it. If you like that beat, you'll probably like the song. This one is more of a journey.
Yeah, and like you said, it goes almost into a sketch. The first track of the album is called Yankee and the Brave, parentheses part 4 to let you know it's the 4th album. LP's from Brooklyn, where the Yankees playing Bronx, but I believe he's from Brooklyn. And the Atlanta Braves are obviously in Atlanta, Georgia, where Killer Mike is from. They call themselves Yankee and the Brave. And they kind of play it off like almost they're like this TV show, like buddy cop, but instead of cops, they're like crooks on the run against the cops or something like that. So it's this very upbeat opening track. And it's very more about like the superficial type of lyrics that they do a lot of times about, like there's fat jokes in there. There's talk about like the cops aren't going to take them alive. They're on the run. They got a bag full of money and they're going to hit the road. And then the last track after this very kind of downbeat track where it's about a lot of reflection and kind of the coda of what their messages have been all about and what they want to do with the band, where they see themselves going. Killer Mike, obviously, a big theme is his activism and him talking about like it may eventually get him killed, but he's not going to shut up. It has this instrumental kind of sad sax breakdown, and then it cuts back to like this TV narrator talking about these two guys and all they have are each other. They may kill themselves, but they're brothers, and you can't knock them down, and they're Yankee and the Brave. And it has this almost like fake out TV show ending, almost like turning the whole thing into a fantasy or something like that. Like to try to end on a maybe like a sarcastic or humorous note. But to me, it's almost like obviously it's their way of tying the album in nicely as a coda, tying back into the opening track.
Yeah.
But since that opening track is so superficial and fun, and the majority of the rest of the album isn't, the rest of the album is very topical, it almost feels like that opening album and that ending there, that ending note of the final track are like tricks into making you feel okay.
Yeah.
Like it's like, don't worry, you can just go live in this fantasy if that's what you really want to do. And like if you don't want to worry about all the other shit we're talking about.
Yeah, and the albums are fun and they're funny and the verses are funny.
Very
fun.
I
think that's what makes them easy to re-listen to. It's not like you said, you've listened to this album a bunch. I've listened to it a bunch over the last however many days since it's been out, and it's an easy listen. And part of that is because the beats kind of allow you to enjoy it, and there's also enough humor kind of breaking up the serious talk that as much as you're moved by the serious talk, occasionally just a minute later there's a joke that'll make you laugh enough to kind of remain engaged, remain enjoying yourself. So it's a weirdly very serious album where you can actually enjoy yourself, but also, like you said, very serious and political and very intelligent. These are two intelligent guys. You have that Yankee and the Brave, that North versus South, that white versus black kind of, even though it's through baseball, it also has all these other implications that I think run through all of the work, even when the artists themselves are not referencing it. It's just kind of inherent in their being. And they remain one of, like you said, the best outfits in hip hop right now. They're just fascinating for all kinds of reasons, but the music itself and the fact that they're like guys in their mid 40s who are just now hitting their peak and just now hitting their stride in a way. And it's interesting to see how hip hop's changing and becoming the voice of the political, and compared to the Bob Dylans of the world of the past versus the, like I said, it's hard to talk about this album outside of just general praise with like the production. But like, even if this album was just about nothing, LP's production would still be amazing and it'd still be a fun listen. But
oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and so on top of that, it's kind of melding everything. And I think, like you said, there is a case certainly for Fiona Apple to have the album of the year, but this one's very much, it feels in a way as much of the moment, if not more. But who knows? That moment keeps changing. It's been such a crazy year, a crazy week. Who the hell knows 2 months from now where we'll be or what we'll think the year represents.
Yeah, it definitely feels like if you want to talk about like what album or what track speaks to the moment the way This Is America did, I think obviously you side with Run the Jewels, but that's not to discredit Fiona and what she's done. She obviously put out an amazing record earlier this year as well. But yeah, it's just great to see. Yeah, I'm a huge fan. I think this is an instant hip hop classic. It's arguably my favorite album of the year so far, and it's cool, like you said, to see these guys in their 40s who grew up in like the Southern rap, the ATL scene, and the gangster rap scene, and now they're torchbearers for this new this new era of social justice and hip hop. It's cool to see.
All right, and on top, we haven't mentioned it yet, so I just wanted to throw out there before we kind of move on to other subjects. My favorite track is track 3, Ooh La La, and which I'm not even sure is the most.
That's track 2, I think.
No, track 2. It's track 1 is Yankee and the Brave. Track 2 is Ooh La La, and track 3. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant track 3. Out of Sight is my favorite track. Yeah, Ooh La.
Okay.
Sorry. Ooh La La was the first single. Track 3, Out of Sight, is my favorite song on the album, which I don't think is necessarily the most politically minded or serious song, but it's just like the fucking beat's incredible, and I can't hear it without. It's the flow of Mike, I think, on top of everything else. There's a couple times on Run the Jewels 3 where his flow had just hit a point where I can't listen to it without my whole body kind of wiggling, and it's just like shit. Like you just kind of start shaking alongside of this kind of flow he hits. And Out of Sight has a few of those moments early on where as soon as I heard it, I was like, this is going to be one of my top 5 favorite tracks of the entire year, no matter what.
Run. Here come the menaces to sobriety. Like what? Super thuggers thumping on the cut.
Run. My motherfucking Uzi weighs a ton. Hit the drum till you hear it go.
Run. Piety just really isn't us. With a rush, see you cutting up a pie. That's my lunch.
Run. Yo motherfucking pockets when I come. It's an honor to be robbed by Denise's only son. Yeah, give her ready, baby boy, bit it, moving extra heavy, whipping Chevy. Gotta get it, eat spaghetti with the monster. Vegan bitches feed them dick 'cause they don't eat no steak and lobster. Sosa was my hero, Honey Tony's just a fucking.
Yeah, then we touched on it. It's very danceable hip hop, which you don't always get. I think for me, obviously that Mike's verse in Walking in the Snow is essential. In terms of favorite track, I don't know. I love Holy Calamafuck, track 4. I do really like Just, the one with Pharrell Williams, and when they bring Zach De La Rocha back. Look at all these slave masters posing on your dollar, the refrain of that.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites as well.
Yeah, but I think it's not the most interesting answer because it was the first single, but Ooh La La is... it's so good. I love it so
It's an
much.
easy listen. It's fun, and I think it does everything that we're talking about in terms of it's 3 minutes. It's really tight. It's well produced. It's fun and easy to listen to. It'll play well on trailers.
Yeah, and also just personally, Ooh La La, they give credit, feature credit to Greg Nice and DJ Premier. DJ Premier is obviously the DJ from the great New York hip hop duo Gangstar. Yeah. And this is obviously the beat on Ooh La La is a reworking of a Gangstar track.
Yeah, which I think at first I was a little disappointed when I heard the track because I was like, "Ooh, Gangstar is going to be on this whole thing," but it's just a sample.
Looking for M's like I lost a friend. Jump out of my bed like where the bread. You go hold the egg. Waiter, bring the check. When we talk, we Kalishnikov. Keep us in your thoughts. Fully dressed at the crack of dawn. Weapons letting off. I can hear them from the block. See them creeping through the fog. Season's greetings, now feeding season can start. Oh my God. Look alive. Looking like I live life on a crooked line. Doing fine. You want maximum stupid. I am the guy.
First of all, fuck the fucking law. We is fucking raw. Steak tartare. Oysters on the half jail.
Yeah, it's a sample of Dwick, which is a great Gangstar track, but they play with it and make it their own. But it also, the way they rework it, really reminds me, the opening really reminds me of Shimmy Shimmy Yeah by Old Dirty Bastard. And then
I can hear that.
They actually call him out in one of the verses. They give a little Shimmy Shimmy Yeah ODB reference. So I'm like, okay, they definitely hear it too. Awesome.
Yeah.
And I was very proud of myself. So I don't know. I honestly, I love tracks 1 through 7. I've listened to on a loop. I think they're fantastic. And then the final track, A Few Words for the Firing Squad, I've also listened to a bunch of times. But yeah, I guess I would have to say Ooh La La if I had to pick number 1. But Just is also really, really great.
All right, that works for me. So obviously, from both of us, it's a huge recommendation. Go check it out. Go watch the Killer Mike video of him talking. It's 8 minutes long. It's great. Go listen to the album. Go listen to previous Run the Jewels albums. There's only 3 of them, and they're all pretty quick listens and pretty good, fun listens, depending on what mood you're in, you'd be surprised how much they kind of work for it. If you want to work out to them, you can. If you want to be very politically minded and serious and intellectual, you can do that as well. So go check out the album. It's one of the best of the year. It's very politically conscious about what's going on in this moment, and Killer Mike's someone you should listen to in terms of the politics of this moment. He's been ahead of the moment for quite some time. So he in particular, I think LP is incredible and responsible for the beats, but there's something about Killer Mike who I feel like comes out of the project looking like he's going to come out being one of the best MCs ever.
I agree.
All right. With that said, go listen to RTJ4. Let's move on. Oh my God, Tom. As if there's not enough going on in the world, you made me watch one of the most heady, fucking weird, out of this world TV shows I've ever seen. Let's talk about the final stretch and the final movie of Neon Genesis Evangelion.
残酷な天使のように少年よ神話になれ
All right, so today we are talking about the finale. We're going to dive into, we've spent the last couple weeks diving into Neon Genesis Evangelion, for those of you who have been listening. And, we knew, I guess we've talked about in previous episodes, that from Tom's awareness that people who had told him about the show was going to get weird. We were told that it was going to get weird, and that a lot of the stuff that we were, prepared for, or the stuff that we were seeing in the early episodes, we were told those are going to all dissipate and the finale is going to be very strange. Little did we know just how much of an understatement that was going to be. So for this week, we finally watched episodes 22 through 26, as well as End of Evangelion, which is the 90-minute follow-up feature that acts as a series finale. It isn't really a standalone feature by any means. I imagine it would mean nothing to anyone who hasn't seen the series. So don't go watching that first if you're trying to figure out the show. It's hard to put exactly into words what happens in these final stretches of episodes. There's, in a way, so much that happens plot-wise that it's not even necessarily a plot development, but it's just so many ideas that are being placed. The story kind of began as a kaiju mecha action anime, and this final stretch has evolved into almost complete abstraction, and it's a deep dive into psychoanalysis and the human condition, the meaning of existence, and I believe the creator's personal battles with depression and overcoming that. And in this stretch of episodes, there are Oedipal ideas. There's religious references to practically a dozen different belief systems. All the while there's like gore and nudity, there's action, and every tool of animation that's available to animators, including live action, by the way, on top of that. So, Tom, where do we begin? How do we begin? Do we even try to explain broadly what happens in the end? Because, I found summaries, but I'm curious what your emotional or intellectual experience was watching it at first. And we'll kind of maybe try and explain it from there. But yeah, what was your reaction to this crazy stretch of episodes in this final run, or this final movie?
I know exactly where we should start.
All right.
A 14-year-old boy coming in his hands while looking at his naked, passed out friend on a hospital bed.
That does happen.
That is basically the opening scene of the movie. Poor Asuka is basically comatose in a hospital bed. Shinji is begging for her to wake up because he needs her. He needs her help. She's a pilot like he is, of these Evas. And he pulls her arm and rips her hospital gown off, exposing her breasts. And then we cut to a series of still animated shots of like various objects in the hospital room. And we hear faint moaning, and then suddenly it's a close-up on Shinji's cum-filled hand, and then he calls himself the lowest of the low. And that's the show in a nutshell. I don't know, man. This is one thing I want to say. So, obviously we're going to get into spoiler talk, blah blah blah. For those who have seen the show, everyone knows the the final 2 episodes in particular are famous or infamous, however you fall. But we watched the last 5 episodes for this stretch, and I do want to make sure that I just say, even if we focus more on the very end of the last couple episodes of the movie, the handful of episodes leading up to the final 2 are some of the best television I've ever seen.
Yeah,
Just full blast.
I mean,
it is so good. I mean, for me personally, for what I'm into, it is so fantastic. I loved how weird and introspective the show got, how esoteric and how surreal and how questioning the show became about just the nature of being a flawed person. I really, really loved it, and I loved how each main pilot, the 3 kids, basically each had their own turn in the spotlight and really got a lot focused on them. But not only those kids, we got Misato got a long stretch to really delve into her psyche. Dr. Akuga, I believe her name is, the female scientist, got a long stretch. Even Shinji's dad, and especially his number 2, got a huge stretch in an episode that was basically an info dump. We got to learn a lot about him.
Yeah.
The show, by the end of the show, I really felt like I had spent so much time with so many characters and knew them better in what amounted to basically one series of like a primetime network show. I feel like I knew several characters, almost a dozen characters maybe, as well as I knew almost any characters of any TV show I've ever seen. And that was really, really rewarding to watch. And those couple episodes leading up to the final 2 are also very abstracted, very weird, and probably very polarizing. But I thought they were truly, truly fantastic episodes of television. So I wanted to make sure that I got that in.
Yeah. They do start to lean into the abstraction that's going to eventually kind of take over the show, but it's not as pronounced, I should say. I guess it's still pretty.
Yeah, not quite as pronounced as, say, like in particular, maybe the final 15 minutes of the show or something.
Yeah. That's at that point in the show, it's just gone over an edge that I didn't know animation had gone over before.
Yes, that especially when you come to know, if people don't, how popular this show was, which I know you made sure to point out in previous episodes of the pod, how this is one of the most successful animes in Japan's history.
Yeah,
which is awesome. I think that's awesome because it's beloved. It's not like it was super popular as this mecha anime that was maybe a little smarter than your average show, and then he pulled the rug under, which is kind of what happened to an analog to this show, which I know a lot of people have brought up. We've even brought up Lynchian has become a term in film and television language, but Twin Peaks is obviously a very apropos comparison to the show, and the difference seems to be both shows. Twin Peaks did a similar thing where it worked itself into a tried and true television genre, the idea of a murder mystery in a small town, hooked its audience in, became very popular very fast, and then revealed the mystery, and then kind of pulled the rug out and got super weird, and the audience abandoned the show.
Yeah.
But the opposite happened here, it seems. It got very popular, working within its genre comfortably, being an above-average type of that show. And then as it got more abstract and weird, its reputation just seemed to continue to grow, and its audience seemed to continue to expand to the point where, we have that movie that came out that we watched, which maybe works as a continuation of the show and a true series finale, maybe works as an alternate series finale, depending on your perspective. But also there's another movie that came out, which is kind of a glorified clip show. And then there are 3 other movies that came out in the late aughts, which are, as far as we've come to understand, kind of like a reboot, reimagining, reworking of the show, and those are all super popular as well. So it's really cool that the show was able to go as far and as weird and as singular in its vision as it did, not only keep its audience, but have an audience that continues to grow to people like you and I who don't really watch any anime.
Yeah.
And now we've spent a month straight talking about it.
Well, all right. So I am a little. I have not 100%. From what I understand, the finale of the show premiered on March 27th, 1996, and from what I understand, and then in July of 97 is when the movie comes out. So there's a little, like a year and a half or so, a little over a year of wait between the end of the show and the theatrical release of end of Evangelion. And from what I understand, I'm a little confused. It seems as if the end of the show was met with extreme derision and a lot of hatred and a lot of misunderstanding, but I don't necessarily believe the end of Evangelion. This is kind of the part where I've seen mixed reports, where it doesn't seem that necessarily the movie was a reaction to that poor reception as much as it was already planned / built off of that reaction. So it seemed to be, there's two different endings depending on the fandom. There's some fandoms that prefer the ending of the show. There's some that prefer the ending of the movie. And they're two very different finales in a way that kind of, depending on how you read them, will leave you with different feelings about what you've ultimately seen. So I definitely wanted to spend some time talking about the end of the finale versus the end of the movie and what that meant. And I guess the only way to really start doing that is to sort of basically, I'll tell you what I think happened, essentially.
Okay, but before you do that, I will concede the floor in a second, but I just want to chime in with what I have come to learn from my research and reading various things about the show. Just based off to go off what you just said. So we talked about this, I think, last week or maybe the episode before. The studio financing the show started to constantly fall behind schedule, and episodes were coming in over budget. So the last dozen episodes or so, the budget is in tighter constraints, and they had less time to edit and work on each episode. And that's why you see a lot more static shots. And so a lot of those restrictions, in part, is what led to the very surreal changes and experimentation in the form that we get to see. It's almost a result of those constraints kind of opened up these new avenues for Anno, the creator. But as far as the ending, what I do know is this seems to be confirmed because I was able to read it from multiple sources, including one that I didn't read the primary source, but they quote the primary source, which is from the creator directly. The episode, so the movie, for those who've seen it, End of Evangelion, is basically 90 minutes. It's basically two 45-minute episodes, to the point where there's even an end credit sequence halfway through the movie. And there's a title card of an episode 25 and then later in episode 26.
Which would have
now, the show
baffled me in theaters.
Also goes just to episode 26. So it's not two additional episodes in terms of the number sequencing, right? It's another episode 25 and another episode 26.
Right, yeah.
So what I've come to understand is the episode 25 we get in the movie, the first half of the movie, that first 45-minute chunk, was his original ending for the show. Those 45 minutes were supposed to be pretty much, I mean, I'm sure not cell for cell, but pretty much were supposed to be the episode in 25 and 26 originally. That's how the show was going to end. That first half of the movie is how the show would end. Because of the budget and timing constraints, Gainax, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the production company. They basically went to him and said, we can't finance this. You're not going to have the time or the money. You're not going to have the resources to end it this way. And he found that out around like episode 16, 18. Basically when Rey has that first surreal sequence of like, what am I? Who am I? That change, that started when Anno, the creator, started to rework the ending for the show because he realized I'm not going to be able to do what I want to do. So while he definitely got, apparently he got death threats, which you even see if you pause it at the exact right moment at the ending of the movie.
Yeah.
When there are these large flashes of one-frame images going over and over again, a lot of those images snuck in there are actually some of the death threats and stuff that he got between the end of the show and the filming of the movie. So it is somewhat a reaction, but a lot of the movie is just his original vision as well. So he got to have his cake and eat it too, which is really cool.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to try really broadly, at least to explain my interpretation of what I think or what I understood to happen. And then
Okay.
we can,
Let me grab my popcorn.
all right.
Can't wait.
Do you have actual popcorn you're grabbing?
No, dude, I'm just really excited for you
I was
to tell me
literally,
what
I
you
was
think
I was
happened.
waiting. I was like waiting to hear some
Oh,
chewing.
man.
I was,
Please leave that pause.
yeah,
in.
I was
That
like,
pause
wait,
has to
oh,
stay.
do you have popcorn? All right.
Okay.
all right.
I'm eating.
All right. So my
Fire away. I can't wait.
my main takeaway, and this is focusing probably more on the final two stretches or the final two episodes, plus the stretch through the finale of the movie. So this is what that is mainly focusing on. So
Okay, so to set up then, in terms of the TV show, Shinjo has just killed the boy angel, right?
Shinji, yeah,
That's the end. That's Shinji. Sorry, has just killed the boy angel, who is the final angel as far as everyone knows. That's how episode 24 ends.
Yeah.
The boy who says he loves him and he's an angel sent there to maybe end humanity and start the third impact, and decides because of his affection for Shinji, he's going to let humans live, and tells Shinji to kill him. After a long struggle and debate, Shinji decides to. So that's the end of 24. Now we're at the final two episodes.
yeah.
I
So
yield my
all
time.
right. So I think what you basically need to understand is that one of the focuses of the show is the Human Instrumentality Project, which is a program that I think the ultimate goal is revealed that is designed to morph all of humanity's consciousness into a single shared consciousness. And the father of Shinji, who has been kind of running the show, he basically wants humanity to end and reset it into a new form because humans suck. And for me, the finale of the TV show leading into the film largely revolves around the main characters' points of view as they go through the instrumentality process. So the process of becoming part of a shared consciousness, a part of sharing your consciousness with others. And it becomes very subjective about Shinji's perspective as he goes through this whole, whirlwind of emotions and whirlwind of psychology and visions and such. And that's where you kind of have this incredible breakdown of animation styles. And basically, I think you have to assume that the end of the world is happening. If you didn't know there was a movie coming, let's just say you're watching the show. I think what you have to assume is that the end of the world is happening and that these episodes somehow represent the emotional journey of Shinji and the others on their way to a new form. So it doesn't actually show the apocalypse or anything that's actually happening in the world around them, but it's a subjective journey into the subconsciousness and melding of different personalities into one. And from what I understood, the movie works as an extension of that. So where you see the events unfold and the aftermath, and ultimately after that stuff, the movie kind of focuses on the actual apocalypse and the aftermath of that apocalypse outside of just the subjective journey that Shinji has to go through throughout that entire last episode. So just ending, before we even get into the movie, the show kind of goes just through this crazy mix of animation styles, of Shinji trying to understand his relationship to himself, his anger, his relationship to the women in his life, sexuality. As I mentioned, these Freudian ideas of like mother and father and who represents whom. And the movie, I should say the show, ends on this note of, it reminded me a lot of Twin Peaks, that idea of he's being shown different realities that could have been presented to him. We see this very happy version of life that was very creepy, and you kind of get a sense of, if he wouldn't be so self-loathing, if he would have just opened himself to others, if he could be more understanding, maybe his friends would react differently, maybe they would have a different existence. And he is being shown these things. And I think the end of the show is him having this positive, kind of a sort of very positive coming to Jesus, whatever you want to call it, moment of like, oh yeah, I do need everybody. I do need people. I do want to be a part of everyone, and I don't want to be alone. And I think that's sort of where the show ends. And I'm curious if that was at least your reading before even we get into the movie of it all.
Yeah, so I agree with a lot of what you said. I think we maybe diverge in a few instances, but yeah, kind of my rough reading of the end of the show. Here's my one question, actually, before I get into that. So you said, we don't see the apocalypse, we don't see the end of the world. But before Shinji is shown these potential alternate realities,
Yeah.
we do see the dead bodies of Misato and the doctor.
Well, I meant the action of it. Yeah, it's not like an action ending.
Yeah, but here's my question then. Is that supposed to just be an alternate reality as well, or did they die?
I assume they all die, and then the movie is about life being remade in a way, or beginning again.
So when he's being shown this alternate reality of humanity coming together as one consciousness, because they're a part of that. Those dead characters in the show.
Yeah, like the character, like the school
dead.
bully and him are getting along. They're laughing at the teacher. He's having a joke.
But I mean, not even in the alternate reality that we see, but like the very end of the show, when he decides to keep on living and to try to continue and be a part of a collective subconscious.
Yeah, I remember
right?
that shot of him standing, and he's kind of like surrounded by the people he loves.
And they're all clapping and saying congratulations over and over.
Yeah, yeah.
But that includes like Misato and the doctor and stuff like that, who are. So it now seems like the goal of the Human Instrumentality Project was a success, and now humanity is now this one shared consciousness, and they don't really have corporeal forms anymore. But does that mean the people who died can now be part of it too? If it's just your soul, your heart. Right? Like, if their bodies died earlier before he makes this decision.
Yeah.
Are they still part of it? Or were those dead bodies another possible version of reality that we're just seeing out of sequence? I'm asking. I don't
know that I know for sure. I think the way I read it was that it was more about Shinji, because the show, I'm blanking on the kid's name, but the male who became an angel in the previous episode, he said, like, Shinji, you have no idea how important you are and how important the decisions you make are going to be. So I did have that sense of, if not chosen one kind of lore, there was this sense of like Shinji is the main character. And I read it completely as an internal journey.
For sure.
Yeah. So it's about him like confronting his own.
And we'll get some clarity on that idea of Shinji's importance to that plan. I think there's more clarity to that in the movie.
Yeah,
than we get in the show.
But the movie kind of, as he delves deeper into his subconscious and his relationships with these other people, that's when you start to see like flashing imagery, like real life stock footage, the images of children's drawings that were apparently drawn by real life children of abuse. You have these like black and white sketches. There's pencil sketches. You name it. Like everything's there, I think, except CGI, which was brand new at the time, so it's not really available. But like every other style of animation is there, and the journey is this internal one, which I guess I could see why that would be disappointing to fans who wanted more explanation of the whole world, or who saw it as kind of a fuck you. As this, like, if you start watching a show like whatever it is, Twin Peaks or whatever, and you're like, hey, this is this detective mystery or something, and then suddenly the show transforms into something else, I can see being disappointed. But yeah, like for me, when I see something like this where you're like, I don't even know what to make of this. This is so internal and so psychologically driven and so visually driven and abstract that it's hard to kind of make your way through it in a logical way, or I think it is just an emotional reaction in some sense. And yeah, I think we can debate a little bit what exactly happens, but I think the show ends generally on a positive note. Am I wrong about reading it that way?
I think the show is definitely positive overall, especially compared to
the movie felt like the darker.
My question
that was just,
the movie's very dark. No, I just had that statement in terms of we get more clarification, literally in terms of the plot and like Gendo, Shinji's father, and why Shinji plays such an important role.
You get an actual like character end for some of these major characters who in the series are kind of dropped off in favor of Shinji's internal experience, whereas I guess I could see fans being like, hey, there's like 10 characters you didn't give me their ending for, where the movie does kind of give you that ending, and then it kind of goes like to an even bigger mind fuck somehow. So here's my interpretation of the ending of the show. So we've talked about how
especially the back half of the show. A lot of it, you brought it up in your intro tonight. A lot of it is Hideaki Anno, if that's how you pronounce his name. If it's not, I apologize. Dealing with his own personal battles with depression, and in particular, he was dealing with a major depressive episode right before the show began, and I one of the things I read was that one of the central questions that he was trying to figure out using art as therapy. I've been reading that a lot in a lot of my research into this show. Is this show was art as therapy for the creator to deal with his depression, and also several large scale, possibly unanswerable questions. But one of them is it okay to run away from your problems, right? So like we talked about it in the beginning when the show is still pretty standard, but good, but standard, how Shinji, even though he's, like you said, maybe the chosen one, or the call to action comes in standard story parlance, and he doesn't answer it. He runs away. There's an entire episode early on when the show first starts to maybe get a little playful with its storytelling structure, where the entire show is him just literally, like physically getting as far away from Nerve headquarters as possible before deciding to come back and try to save the world. So there's this whole struggle Shinji's been going through about, like, why do I have to be the hero? I don't want this. I don't want this. Everybody leave me alone. I'm so sad. I'm so lonely, but please love me. Please give me attention. So, like, Shinji's clearly a depressed character. All three of the pilots in their own way are dealing with very traumatic childhoods. They're dealing with some psychological issues in some way or another. Shinji's in particular is depression. And the way I read the ending, as someone who has depression and is medicated for depression, is literally trying to answer the age-old question of, if you are constantly depressed and if you are battling that demon day in and day out, what can you hang on to make life worth living? Like, that to me seems to be the central question of the show, and particularly the finale. So we see Shinji go on this inward journey, and almost to the point where, not almost, literally to the point where the show breaks the fourth wall, and the screen itself just starts to question characters. Like there's an omniscient narrator who we can't see or hear, but we just read in text, starts to ask different characters these questions, and they start to badger the characters over and over with the same question, trying to like crack through some kernel of truth, and Shinji gets the brunt of it. And a lot of it are questions like, why do you pilot the Eva? Why do you do this? Why, this is what you're supposed to do. And his first answer is like, it's because it's what I've been told to do. He asks Asuka, and it's because that's what I'm good at. And then you realize, like, well, why is it important for you to pilot just because you're good at it? And it's because, well, I have nothing else. I had to force myself to be an adult at a young age because my mom killed herself and tried to kill me, and my dad was sleeping with my mom's nurse. And if I didn't become an adult who could take care of herself and her own shit, then I needed a mom who tried to murder me and isn't here anymore. So it's like the show is really trying to break down walls of all of these characters and get into their psyche. So with Shinji's psyche, it's, are you able to find purpose in this? Is it enough for you to be a hero for other people when you don't want other people around, even though you do, but you can't admit it? And the end of the show is him deciding, do you want to just end the world? Do you want to stop and live in a non-existence where you think you'll be happy, and that's kind of what you say because you keep running away? Or are you willing to try to work with people, and is doing that for people enough?
Yeah.
To just keep going like another day. Is that enough? Let's put aside the potential third impact, the apocalypse of the world. Let's just put that aside, Shinji. And let's just answer the question, can you keep going another day for the sake of others? And he eventually decides yes, which I think is a very optimistic, hopeful ending for someone with depression like the character has, like the creator has. And that's why he literally gets congratulated and the show ends. And what I love about it is how meta it gets too. We see the different realities. You mentioned the one reality where now him and Asuka are childhood friends, and Rei is no longer an artificial creation that has lived through 3 versions of existence. She's also just another schoolgirl, and Shinji's parents are together and they're happy. And what you're seeing is basically the bad version of what this show could have been. You're seeing the standard shitty version of Neon Genesis, right? And then in another alternate reality, he's in a plane of nothingness. He's like a sketch just drawn in a void, in a white void. And the omniscient narrator is basically saying, you're free to do whatever you want now. You're going to be completely alone. You're going to live in a non-existence because you're not willing to share your heart and soul with the rest of humanity. But you're the one who gets to decide. This is the point of your dad's job. This is his ultimate goal. You are the decider. This is why you've been so important. So you can have this reality. You're just going to live. You're just going to float in a white void, and you can do whatever you want. And he freaks out, and he says, I need some structure. And then the narrator paints a line on the horizon and says, okay, now you can stand on the ground. Now you have up and down. But that means your options are limited now. And now you don't have quite as much freedom as you had. But I can continue in this fashion or not, but you're going to be completely alone. But you get to choose whatever you want. And he freaks out from that. So he has to work through all of these different questions and answers. And it's really the most like introspective and hard hitting in a very weird way, a very unique way that a character has ever like had to reckon with from his own show. You know, it's totally bizarre but totally fascinating. And like you said, I can get why maybe some people are dissatisfied with the ending. Although I always get kind of bummed out by people who rebel against something so unique and cool like this, because while maybe we didn't see the impact of the third impact, or like we didn't see the apocalypse happen, we pretty much answered every hanging thread in the show. Like, what really was the second impact? How did all these characters get to be where they are? What is Asuka's tragic backstory that she hints at? What about Misato's backstory? What about Dr. Akuga's backstory? Like, what happened to Shinji's mom? Oh, she ended up basically melding herself with the Eva unit. That's how she died mysteriously. Like, all these questions we get answered.
Yeah,
you know?
I think...
So in terms of like all these questions, he doesn't just leave them dangling, you know? So in terms of that, in terms of a plot, those plot elements, I thought it was satisfying, and it didn't bother me that it went this weird way.
Yeah, I think both of us, as people who generally like abstraction, probably left the finale being like, well, yeah, we're good. Like, we can infer the rest. And that's okay with us. And I can understand why that's not okay with some other people. But it's interesting that you tell me that I didn't know that the first 45-ish minutes or so of the movie were the original ending, because for me, of the movie, like as I was saying, I left the series kind of feeling, well, yeah, he achieved an internal kind of peace. That's the journey of the show. That's a good ending as any. Like, I'm good. I don't know that I need more. And I understand there's some plot threads that maybe you could pick up, but I was a little suspicious of like, well, what is there to do? And I think watching the show, it's actually quite darker, because the show ends with him accepting a kind of peace and
you said watching the show is quite darker, but you mean watching the movie, right?
Watching the movie, yeah, because watching the show versus that, the ending, at least, the end of the show is quite, in a way, peaceful, or at least he finds some peace. And I think the movie, from my reading of it, is a bit darker and a little bit more complex, because at least, I guess, just to summarize what happens in the movie very, very, very broadly, because...
And I will say before you say that, although that is what I've read, I can't say for sure that that it's verbatim, those 45. Like, maybe the final 10 minutes of this show was always planned, but instead of how they get to that point, maybe it was more the script from the movie. So maybe it was like a combination.
Yeah. And I think, I was going to say, when I was watching the movie, my first thought, at least through the first 45 minutes, was, I don't know that I need this. This feels in some ways repetitive, or Shinji's going through an emotional journey that I just saw him go through. So I did kind of feel through the first 45 minutes of the movie that it was a little bit repetitive in terms of the emotional journey of this character. But I think by the end I was won over, especially because just to kind of go into what I think happened. So in the end, after finding out all this crazy stuff about the angels and relationships of that angels were different versions of humans, and that they were that everyone is trying to get back to Adam, is essentially what you're told. The original angel who is kind of underground, the one hanging on the cross. So you're told that, and then the end is this spatial battle between a giant ray who is melded with Adam, and it becomes this almost Salvador Dali come to life space god imagery shit, and Shinji realizing once again that he needs humanity, even if his instinct is to reject them. I think that's kind of the important thing, is Shinji realizing that he both needs humanity and what is the acceptance of that humanity at the end of the show, but that he, even after he accepts it, will continue to reject it, which is, I think, something that we as humans do a lot, in terms of we want to accept love, we want to be given it, but as soon as we are kind of suspicious of it or rejecting of it. And I think that's the cycle that Shinji / the creators of the show are kind of trying to explore. At least that was my takeaway from it. And as Shinji realizes once again that he needs humanity, even if his instincts is to reject them. And the end of this film is this incredibly powerful and dark scene where he rematerializes, I should say, with Asuka on a beach. And after he and the other characters have had this melding of personalities and kind of come to an understanding and a melding of one singular consciousness, they find themselves, he decides, you know what, it would be worth it for me to be a human and experience pain than just to live in this kind of nothingness of pleasure. And he decides that it is worth the balance of pain and pleasure to be a human, and those contradictions are worth living for. So at the end, after he rejects this kind of godly transformation into a single consciousness, that is the project that his father has been working on, the human instrumentality project. After that's become a thing, he rejects that and rehumanizes himself on a beach, and he's there with Asuka, and the first thing he does is he fucking strangles her, and it's horrible and it's upsetting. But then in the very last beats of the movie, she reaches up and he stops, and teardrops beat on her. And for me, that realization was, no matter what, it's a lesson he's going to have to keep learning over and over again. It's this rejection of love contrasted with this need for love. And you need people, even if sometimes you want to strangle them in a way. And to me, that was the end of the show, was this ultimate compromise of like, you can find happiness in self understanding and joy and rediscovery of yourself. And whereas the movie's ending is much more like, you're going to find love, but you're also going to reject it ultimately. And you're always going to have that relationship of conflicting against it. So that was sort of where I ended up at the end of the movie, was this internal struggle of, I need love, but I don't want your love, or whatever it was. I don't know. If that was sort of my reading of the movie ultimately, outside of the crazy visuals and abstraction and actual plot machinations. That was sort of what I took away from it.
Yeah, I like that reading a lot. I think obviously the most memorable part, whether it's your favorite or not, of the movie is the last act, I think, for sure. We get some truly, especially considering the show we've just watched, we get some imagery that is on par with the great surrealist animation images we've ever seen in movies before.
Yeah, like I said, it's like a Salvador Dali painting come to life in many respects.
Yeah, and it's like, Fantastic Planet type stuff, and like there's a lot of you see a lot of maybe influence that it's pulling from, and also stuff it is influenced in later works that have come out after Neon. Like a lot of the imagery at the end, I felt its influence in the newest Blade Runner movie. It just, a lot of the imagery just reminded me of the 2049 we see in the 2017 Blade Runner. Yeah, I think so. I definitely think the movie is much darker than the ending of the TV show. Like what I was saying earlier, I think that idea of it's ultimately Shinji's choice to decide the fate of his father's project becomes much more clear. Like, we actually get to hear his father say it, and we kind of start to understand his father's reasoning, which is, you know, I'm doing this to reunite with my wife, who basically gave her life, either knowingly or unknowingly, or how intentionally it was, we still don't really know, but to this Eva, which Shinji's been piloted this whole time. And one of the things I like about the idea that only the kids can pilot them, and how only these like teenagers can sync with these Eva machines, and it's always these troubled teens who are dealing with some trauma. There's so much womb-like imagery inside the Evas, like the way they're actually situated.
Yeah, there's so much like being within another person, or the psychology of existing within somebody else versus controlling them.
Yeah, like
fathers and mothers.
He's obviously,
and shit.
Yeah, like obviously this is a very psychologically dense show, and there's a lot of Freudian and Jungian psychology, like you were talking about, Oedipal complexes galore, and you end up finding out, you know, as comfortable as these kids find themselves inside their Evas, they come to be like a safe space for them. And you basically come to find out that Shinji, every time he's piloting his Eva, the Eva 01, he's basically back inside his mom, like quite literally, which is a crazy reveal, a very cool reveal. So my interpretation of the ending is pretty similar to yours, where Rei, who we know to be this non-human, who is the show, maybe we did disservice by not talking about Rei too much in the show, because I think she may be my favorite character in the entire series. We come to find out that her journey in the back half of the show is basically actualization. You know, like the genesis of the show kind of really switching gears and getting much more abstract and introspective is with Rei, and that whole like who am I, what am I montage thing she goes through. And, you know, we come to find out pretty early towards the back half of the show that she's not human. And it seems to be for her a journey of struggling to find out, like, is she a person? Does she have a soul? Does she deserve to live? Like, does she deserve to have autonomy? And the decision she comes to in the show is basically, I'm a human being because other people perceive me as such. Like, observance is existence for her. Like, Shinji cares about me. And that's enough to make me a human being who deserves to live, who deserves to have a life. And to me, that's a very powerful realization and a really powerful idea in a character, especially in a young character. Because to me, that's like, maybe I'm reaching here, but I don't know. I've thought a lot about this in the past couple weeks, and what we're seeing with these protests and the idea of these groups of people who have always been marginalized. And there seems to be a real reckoning taking place of these people need to be seen, and we haven't listened to their cries for help, right? Like, you know, there's that MLK quote that you mentioned last week, a riot is the language of the unheard. And I think there's a lot of that going on with Rei. A lot of people throughout the entire show ignore her and just think she's creepy and don't want to engage with her because she's so quiet and she's so passive and she's so, robotic, basically. But she's dealing with this really epic internal struggle. So I really like that in the movie, the final act is her being the impetus for Gendo's instrumentality project. Basically, like you said, she melds with Adam and becomes this godlike figure and is basically the messenger, the carrier. Like she's like Noah's ship.
Yeah, it's right? Because she was made with the DNA of so and
make them one collective thing. Like she comes up to every. It's a crazy sequence in the movie where we see her go to every side character we've been following throughout the whole show in the movie, and the last thing they see before they die basically is like something that they love. Like there's one employee at Nerve who is clearly in love with Misato, and right before she collects his soul and his spirit and his heart, she transforms into Misato and gives him a big kiss, and then his head explodes. And we see that over and over again with all these characters we've been following, and we end up seeing it with Shinji's dad, and he's talking to his dead wife and saying, you know, I was so hard on Shinji because if I got close to him, it would basically corrupt this.
Well, it was almost like all of them got their dream ending except for him, who was like, that was the only person who I saw as being judged by the kind of ghost or whatever it is you want to call it that went to visit them. It's like the rest of everyone got this happy ending, like, oh, this girl you've always wanted to kiss you is going to kiss you. But he is met with a mother who is like, you were a terrible father. And he has to kind of repent for that in his very last moments.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because, like, you realize, you know, why he cares so much about Rei. Like, before she goes on this inner journey, the only thing that's really keeping her going is that she feels loved by Gendo. And Gendo Rei almost becomes like the surrogate child for Gendo, which is a big problem for Shinji throughout most of the show. Like, I'm your actual son. Why do you not give a shit about me, but you care about this, like, lifeless girl who doesn't really seem to show any emotion or care about anything, right? And you realize it's because, like, he's made this girl in his wife's image with the ultimate goal of using her to get back with his wife. So it's like this. It's fucking like Shakespearean in its machinations. It's just absolutely crazy. But so Rei becomes this godlike figure, and the question comes back to Shinji, like you said. I won't repeat basically what you said, except the very end, when he's back on the beach. You know, there's this conversation. I think it's maybe Misato's voice we hear, but I forget now. But there's this idea of, like, with the Human Instrumentality Project, the ultimate goal is, like, humans had their chance and they keep fucking up. It's obviously not working the way it's supposed to work, but maybe if we can all become this one giant consciousness that's just based in love and understanding in our souls, we can live forever. And even if we perish from this earth, even if the apocalypse comes and wipes us all out, which we already see happen in the first half. Like, there's a brutal sequence of violence where the government has basically taken over, and their goal now is to wipe out any acknowledgement that nerve ever existed. And there's this, like, horrible sequence where we just see all these employees just getting, like, murked, like, gunned down. There's one crazy moment. Do you remember the one I'm talking about where, like, an employee's crying and trying to drag a dead body away to safety? And a group of soldiers run by, and one
stops in the hallway and just, like, shoots.
Stops, and, like, out of the corner of his eyes, like, oh, boop, knocks you out too. And it's just, like, a trail of dead bodies. But, yeah, there's this idea of, like, even if we don't survive on Earth, we can leave some testament to that we survived. And that testament basically becomes Shinji choosing to stay in his human form. And like you said, his first reaction is to choke out Asuka, and then she touches him tenderly, which was a running theme throughout the show. Like, he would always recoil from people's touch, which for the show and for him that was the whole idea of his inability to get close and to engage in intimacy because of his fucked up childhood and his upbringing.
Yeah, so
and being abandoned. So, but to me, that ending, even though the whole ending is pretty dark, that ending is super dark and it's very touching. But I also find it kind of funny because the very last thing you hear after this crazy journey is just Asuka going right back again to calling him an idiot or like a moron, like, oh, you dummy, like just basically calling him out for like, you try to kill me, you'll never learn.
Yeah,
which is really bizarre and a super weird and probably a depressing ending, but in its own way, that's how the movie starts. We see Asuka in that hospital bed when he ends up jerking off in that weird scene, but he's begging her to wake up and saying, like, call me an idiot again, I don't care, because that has become, for better or worse, the way those characters
communicate.
That's how they communicate and they interact with each other. And so in its weird way, even though he was just strangling her, and even though he breaks down crying because she finally touched him and he didn't recoil from it, she says that line, which is kind of like a comedic moment, but in its own way, it's like the movie's way of saying, like, yeah, this is who they are, and that's okay, you know.
Yeah. So walking away from the movie, like I said, I think in the first 45 minutes I had that concern of, is this repeating what was just happening in the... Well, I guess it was a mixture because there was a lot of action in the first 45 minutes-ish. And I feel like there was that part of me that was like, is this just the action finale that people were mad that they didn't get from the show? And I think I kind of had my guard up a little bit through that section, as well as kind of feeling like the emotional beats that Asuka was going through, not Asuka, sorry, Shinji was going through, was kind of repetitive of what he'd already been through in the finale. So I was a little concerned at first, I think, of what is this show have anything new, or does this movie have anything new to say versus what the show already said? And I think ultimately, like you said, the end is very dark. It's different. Supposing where you want to end the show or the story, I think they're both valid endings for different reasons, and they both are interesting mirrors of each other in very interesting reasons. But I did walk away from the movie, and I'm curious what you think about this generally with the show, and that it did dive into a lot. But I kept thinking of the Forgetting Sarah Marshall scene where she's looking at all of his tattoos, and she's saying, like, you know, this is a Buddhist one, this is a Christian one, this is a Judaism one. Like, just, you are not a student of the world. This is all mixed together. These are contradictory ideologies that you are mixing together, and this is bullshit. And I did have that, like, question, I guess, halfway through of wondering, like, this is throwing a lot at me, and I might be too stupid to understand if it's bullshit or not. You know, like, I don't know if you had that sense of, like, this could all be gobbledygook, and I'm not smart enough to know, but I know that I'm liking it. So I did have that kind of sense of, like, it's throwing so much at you that I can understand that, like, it's so many, like, they are literally talking about these psychological ideas that we're kind of going into. It's both not subtle and very subtle at the same time, if that makes sense. And I was curious how your reading of it in terms of, like, yeah, this is incredible that an anime show or something ostensibly geared towards teenagers developed into this crazy deep dive into psychoanalytics. I'm curious if you had any hesitations about, like, well, is this just the most basic 101 psychoanalytical kind of, you know, baseline thing, or if you were just, like, totally in for it. I'm curious if you had any moments of hesitation or doubt, because, you know, well, like I said, I very much enjoyed the movie, but I think I kind of had a suspicion throughout of kind of, like, what's the point of view? Are you adding anything to the show? And it's all kind of in contrast with, I think, what I heard the reaction to the finale was. So I was curious for myself, is this movie a reaction to that fandom, or is this a legitimate statement from the artist? And ultimately, I think it is a statement from the artist, but I'm also curious in the ways that it, you know, changed the show that it did start out as becoming, and I'm curious what you think of it as just a piece of film, like, on its own.
Yeah, I didn't have that. I know what you're saying. I didn't have that concern because to me, this show and the person behind it, the creator of it, I felt nothing but, like, complete. And, you know, you mentioned that it's very heady, but also very blunt at the same time. Like, a lot of times it's very obvious. And that's why it worked so well for me, because even if I wasn't picking up on every moment, and even if I didn't understand every nuance of the story or whatever, I never doubted the genuine intentions of its creator. I, like, you know, like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of talk and a lot of the readings about the show is that it was art as therapy for this guy. And it was really him trying to work out his own feelings. And I think if you're willing to really do that in a very raw, real, genuine way, you're probably going to contradict yourself at some point. You're probably going to step over something you laid down earlier.
Yeah, I think I was going to say
it's going to get messy like that, you know. And that's why I never got the sense that this was a guy trying to teach me something or, like, lay down a psychology lesson. It never felt like that. It felt purely from the emotional side of things, and from really, like, I'm trying to figure this out too. And that's why I never questioned any of that. I guess.
Yeah, I guess there was a part of me that was like listening to all the psychoanalytical Freudian Oedipal kind of mumbo jumbo being, espoused throughout, mixed with the, Catholic, mixed with Judaism, mixed with Buddhist like imagery, and wondering like, I know this is all impressive because they're like, aiming big, but does this make any actual sense to me? I don't know. And so,
well, just because they're different ideologies doesn't always mean they're at odds with each other. I mean, for example, I was just reading this fantasy series, and in the third and final book of the trilogy, a guy who wasn't a main character, who was a major side character, almost becomes the main character because his job in this world, this fantasy world, is he's the keeper of all the religions of the world. And, 99% of them are extinct, and his role is to remember all of them and preach all of them. And he has a crisis of faith where he feels like he can no longer teach them because he doesn't believe himself. The love of his life has just died, blah, blah, blah. But by the end of the trilogy, he realizes none of these are absolute truths, but most of them contain kernels of truth. A lot of them come from the same source, or a lot of them branch off of the same tree, where the same roots that were built branch off all of these different subsects. So I think like you can have these contradicting schools of thought and belief systems all within the same work, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you're contradicting yourself. If you're working at it from this angle of artist therapy and trying to figure it out yourself, which is how just me personally, that's how I took it.
Yeah, and I guess I'm only trying, like I said, it worked for me. I really liked the show. I'm just trying to reconcile the intellectual, like, piecing together of what they're actually saying versus the emotional experience of just having watched it. And what you just said, actually, I know this sounds very corny, but it reminded me of a Bright Eyes lyric, which is, the Bible's blind, the Torah is deaf, the Quran is mute. If you burn them all together, you'll get close to the truth. And I don't know. I sort of think that's what the show is in a way. It's like, I'm going to take all these psychological ideas, these religious ideas, these scientific ideas, these genre ideas, and kind of throw them all into this mix, and hopefully you like it. And I think for both of us, we clearly liked it. We were like, yeah, mix all this shit together. Give us Twin Peaks mixed with Pacific Rim. It worked for us.
Absolutely. It worked so well.
All right. Is there anything you want to talk? Is there any other thing? I mean, there's both a billion things and nothing else left to talk about it in a way.
Yeah, no, I feel pretty comfortable with where we left off. I mean, we're both big fans. It's obvious to say. I would highly. It's on Netflix right now. Who knows with these things how long it'll stay there? It's not a show that's very easy to find otherwise. As far as I know, the original DVDs out of print, even the reboot movies that came out in the late aughts, those are not super easy to find, especially if you want like a physical copy. Like a Blu-ray of the first one on Amazon's like $50. So while the show and End of Evangelion, the 90s, the first movie that came out after the show, while they're on Netflix, at least in the US, watch the show while you can, because it is a completely singular experience. I've never seen anything like it. I'm so glad I finally watched it after being told since I was in high school to watch this show. I absolutely loved it. It's one of my favorite recent discoveries. It's a great start to our classic Blind Spot series.
Yeah, and I'll just say, as someone who is both open to anime and also skeptical of starting the show, I was kind of just like, okay, Tom, if you really want to do this, let's do this. But I didn't really have any enthusiasm or much enthusiasm about it, largely because I didn't quite know what I was getting into, so it was kind of abstract. But having been someone who is not that into anime and delving into this, I found it very rewarding. I'm very happy we did it. And I've been, like I told you, I think before we were recording, I was recommending it to other friends who have actually started it. My friend Joey. Joey is now diving into it because as soon as I saw it, Joey is someone who has Salvador Dali paintings all around his home. So I was like, dude, there's a show. And I sent him all these screen grabs. And he's like, I'm watching that now. And he's been diving into it. And he's not someone who's necessarily into anime, but he's sent me a text today saying he's loving it. So I'm very glad that you pushed me towards it. I'm very glad that I discovered it. I'm very curious to kind of see where the anime journey leads me from here on out.
that warms my heart. I'm so glad you were willing to take the jump and trusted me. I'm so glad you loved it. Obviously, I know Joey. I am. I am glad that white boy loves it.
Yeah,
Joey's a funny dude.
Yeah,
he's great, and he has great taste. I'm not surprised he would dig it. He's always come across as a guy who has really good, like, he knows when something's good, when something's special. He knows.
It's his house that we were at when I had cookies on my belly watching Do the Right Thing.
Sure was.
Yeah, so
it sure was.
So he's one of those weird stoner guys who are like, hey, what are your top 5 films? Then he'll tell you his top 5 films, and you're like, oh, well, that's pretty good, actually. So
yeah, he's great. I'm glad he's loving it. And I guess in the interest of fairness, since this wasn't really a title we agreed upon for the classic blind spots thing, which I had suggested, and you were down for the idea, but obviously this was my suggestion because you didn't really know about it, and you kind of just decided to trust me with it, and especially because it was a series and not just like one movie. If you have an idea for the next entry in this series, whether it's another show, whether it's a movie or whatever, I'll defer to you for part 2. So think on it and decide what you want to decide. We'll continue on.
Cool. Yeah, I will think of something. We'll see. I think for the next upcoming weeks, to give viewers a kind of hint, I think we're, like I mentioned, talking about Spike Lee movies. I would love for more than any show, I would love for you to rewatch or revisit or first time visit some Spike Lee joints. We're going to talk about some Apatow movies in the upcoming weeks. We've got plenty to tackle. So I'm
the vast of Night and Shirley.
The Vast of Night and
movies.
Shirley. Yeah, a couple very good independent movies that have come out this year. We've got a lot to talk about. So I'm good for now. You know, when I think of a blind spot, I think that I certainly have my own that I've been, in a way, I think my entire past couple years have been about tackling blind spots, or at least tackling filmmakers who I've always wanted to understand more. So I've talked in previous shows about tackling directors. This week I've been watching Cheryl Dunye movies and Kenji Mizoguchi movies, and yeah. So I don't know. It's I don't know what I'd recommend. I don't have anything off the top of the dome this second, but I'll get you back for this for you for
Gone with the Wind's always waiting for us.
Yeah, what's crazy is people are like, oh man, that's a long movie, and I'm like, well, 12 hours plus of a TV series is pretty long as well. So
that's right. Yeah, that's
so
right.
One movie versus a TV show plus a movie is different. So I'll have to think of something, and there is a part of me, I must admit, that wants to find something that you will instinctively not like at first. I want to I want to find something where you're just going to be like, that's what you want to cover,
I mean, you could do an episode on Ryan Adams,
but I don't want to because he hasn't been good the last couple of years. So I have to,
and that's not a blind spot for you either.
True, yeah, it's not new for me. I got to find something like, I don't even know what it is, because I feel like it's not that you're not open to world cinema. It's that I think you've been closed lately, the last year or two. It's not so much that you're closed permanently, but you've
not world cinema, indie, some certain types of indie cinema. I would say I'm definitely been closed off to, but not world cinema. It hasn't been a focus, but I have not been closed off to that. I wouldn't say that. There are definitely certain types of art house movies I for sure am, but if you wanna try to bring about some world filmmaker that I'm not familiar with, I'm open to it for sure.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, even if it's someone who I think the conflict for me is someone who I've just recently discovered and wanting to rewatch their work versus someone you don't know. I don't know. We'll figure it out later for future episodes. We've got plenty going on. It's not as if there's not enough going on, especially for the month of June. For anyone looking ahead, as we talked about, there's Spike Lee. We're going to do Judd Apatow. I think the end of the month, we're going to talk about the best of the year so far. So we've got plenty coming in June before we even jump into anything extra. But yeah, I'm glad I'm very glad. I'm surprised how glad I am that we made time for this anime series, which, like you said, I had zero expectations for. It's not that I was anti-anime. It was more of I just don't know what to expect from that. So, and that kind of not having any expectations ended up helping me enjoy the show even more, because I had such low expectations that by the time it was reaching these levels of artistry that I had no idea could even grasp for, it was very rewarding. So that said, I not to keep going back to political stuff, but I think that mixed with what we were saying earlier about political stuff, about black culture and everything, like just because you don't understand it or you think it is not for you does not mean it is not incredibly rewarding to dive into. And however many films we've mentioned over the course of this podcast, it's all worth diving into other cultures. That's the beauty of art. And that's kind of what I've overall taken from Run the Jewels, I Am Not Your Negro, Selma, Neon Genesis, all that stuff. Everything from a different culture.
It's really hard to continue being a racist if you're a racist. It is very difficult to continue being racist if you open yourselves up to art from all around the world. Whatever it is, whether it's movies, music, authors, whatever, it is very, very hard to hold on to your prejudices if you just open yourself up to those different perspectives. That's how I view it, and that's why this stuff it matters on top of being entertaining.
All right, I agree 100%. With that said, Tom, let's wrap it up. Let's do some recommendations. Tell me, this week, I know we've had some craziness. There's been a lot of releases. What's been your focus? What is your recommendation for the week? What are you going to tell the people to go seek out?
Yeah, musically, so Run the Jewels, RTJ4, obviously, like we said, and Neon, those two things you got to get into. There's a couple things I want to highlight. This is a weird one. So I have a few things. But the first one I'm going to say, which is weird because I've told you in recent weeks as we've recorded this, not even to bother mentioning my Twitter handle because I'm rarely on Twitter anymore. But I'm going to recommend social media today because, people think what you want about social media. I have plenty of issues with it. But the fact of the matter is, if you're not on it on some level right now with everything that's going on, and all you're getting from if your news source is coming just from cable news, and you're not trying to follow and engage with leaders of the protests on the street, or black voices, black artists, black activists, allies of Black Lives Matter movement, if you're not on social media following these people and going to these primary sources, you're not getting the full story. And in today's day, we have the ability to hear and see things directly from these primary sources in the struggle that are out there doing the work out on the street. Media outlets are always going to filter and angle their coverage. That's nothing new. But if you focus on the news story, I don't know if I told this in a podcast, but this has been a major talking point with a lot of conversations I've had. When the protests first broke out, I went home and I spent 4 hours flipping between ABC, NBC, and CBS, the local LA news affiliates. And obviously it was breaking news. The protests were everywhere. All three were focused on Fairfax Avenue. There was one fire happening. They spent 4 hours. They never changed their camera angle, right? They just never focused on anywhere else. So if you're just watching those news stations, all you're going to focus on was the riots in these protests. Now, you talked about it earlier, Phil. The rioting, the looting has pretty much disappeared from protests around the country.
Right, yeah.
But you wouldn't think that. You wouldn't think that if you're not following the people that are actually going to the protests and posting about it on social media, or if you're on social media and you're following all of the instances we're seeing of just senseless, needless police brutality at these protests, which often instigate a lot of the riots and the violence at the protests. So even though I have my own issues with social media, even though social media can be a black hole, it can be a suck hole, it can promote awful human qualities, but in times of social change, in times of social revolution, like right now, like the Arab Spring several years ago, it's just a vital and absolutely essential tool that people simply need to engage in if they want to be informed, if they want to be involved, if they want to be an ally. So social media, weirdly, is one thing I'm going to recommend this week.
Cool.
A couple other things very quickly. Just to keep it politically.
All right.
There's a bunch of stories about Lindsey Graham,
Lady G,
hiring a bunch of male escorts. The word's finally getting out. But in particular, there's a story circulating about a male escort who was apparently hired by Lindsey Graham. He didn't know at the time until Lindsey Graham showed up in the hotel room, and he gets out of the escort gets out of the bathroom. Lindsey Graham is naked on all fours. and he says his anus area just looks disgusting. And he asks Lindsey Graham, "Have you showered?" He says, "Yes." He says, "Do you mind if I wipe you down?" He says, "Yes." Go for it. He wipes him down. And this escort says, "I realized he wasn't actually dirty, but that his area was just covered in moles." And Lindsey Graham, according to this guy, responded, "Oh, I hope you're not upset about that. Them's just my ladybugs." It's it's the best thing ever. So read that, find that story. Just look up, Google Lindsey Graham and ladybugs. Let that be the first word that pops up on Lindsey Graham's name when you Google search him from now on. That would be a very great thing. Okay, two more things very quickly. Just Google "suck my dick and choke on it" or "I yield my time, fuck you" to listen to the greatest 30-second rant on a police LA outreach Zoom call. This guy is brilliant. We talked about Zach De La Rocha earlier. This guy has pure Rage Against the Machine energy. Just Google it. "I yield my time, fuck you." You will not be disappointed. The last thing, going back to social media, I found this account. I was so this girl, this female film critic. I've been using her as a resource for the Neon Genesis talks we've been having. She wrote a great series of essays on Mubi, MUBI, about Neon, about the show, and actually she talks about the end of Evangelion movie. So I ended up looking up her Twitter handle to give her a follow because I really appreciated her discussions. So I go on her Twitter page, and the first thing she comments is a retweet, and it says something like, "Oh man, great thing to wake up to." And it's this Twitter account called, I'm looking up the name, I'll find it and I'll make sure I add it in the description, but it's I think it's called like Best Music 95 or something like that. I'll get the correct Twitter handle in a second. But basically it's this guy who's been going year by year in the 1990s, and he's hosting a 128 album tournament year by year in the 90s. He's already done a handful. Right now they're in the Sweet 16 of 1992, and this is basically fan decided. You vote in. He picks the 125 most voted on albums from a particular year. Then he has 3 bonus selections that he gets to choose, and he ranks them based on how many votes each has received, and he starts a tournament day by day, one matchup at a time, and it whittles down from 128 to 1. So right now we're in 1992, and Phil, can you guess the number 1 seed? An album from 1992. I will give you a clue. It is a band I have name-checked tonight.
Well, I feel like I'm cheating a little bit because I literally typed in best albums of 1992, and the first one that came up was "Automatic for the People" by REM. So
that is
I would assume that is what you're talking about.
This is so the Twitter page. The tournaments are all taking place on Challonge, that website that Film Spotting uses, CHALLONGE.com. I'll post the link. This guy's Twitter handle is @bestalbum95. So just best album singular 95. And he goes year by year. We're in the middle of 1992. I just found out about it today, but this, Phil knows I love art and I love tournaments. This is my fucking jam. I'm going to be spinning all of these albums very heavily. I think he posts 1 matchup a day, Monday through Friday. The very next matchup is another Sweet 16. So right now, REM's Automatic for the People has advanced to the Elite 8, the number 1 seed. It will go up against the number 8 seed, PJ Harvey's Dry. And now the next matchup that is being voted on tonight, ends tomorrow morning. The number 4 seed, Sonic Youth's Dirty, is up against the number 13 seed, Tori Amos's Little Earthquake. So if you're interested, spin some of those albums. I know the next matchup includes Angelo Badalamente's Twin Peaks album, so that's awesome. But it's very cool if you like tournaments. You can also find the Challonge site on his Twitter page, which connects you to all the previous tournaments, and you can look up all those albums, see who won different years. It's very fun.
Cool. I'll check that out. I know of what you listed. Little Earthquakes is my favorite, so Well, I'll have to look at.
How about, okay, let me give you, since there are only a couple other matchups still left in the tournament. Tell me if you have a preference. Sure. The Beastie Boys' Check Yourself versus Ice Cube's The Predator.
Ice Cube's The Predator.
Dr. Dre's The Chronic versus The Cure, Wish.
Chronic.
The Far Side's Bizarre Ride to the Far Side, their Far Side's debut album, versus Neil Young's Harvest
Moon.
And lastly, the number 2 seed overall in the tournament. The only album above this is R.E.M's Automatic. Pavement's Slanted and Enchanted versus Stereolab's Peng, which I believe is their debut.
I don't know Stereolab well enough. I feel like that's not fair. Okay.
So, and then what about the first Elite Eight? REM's Automatic versus PJ Harvey's Dry. You have an opinion?
I know Automatic for the People more. I don't know if it.
Yeah, that's gonna win. If that doesn't win, I'm rioting. I'm restarting the riots.
Yeah. The Stereolab song I know is Lobu Boscalator, and there's very little Stereolab I'm familiar with. It's very German, as far as I know.
Well, then, if you're going to be like me, this is a good excuse to start checking these albums.
Yeah.
But I've spoken a lot in the Rex section. I yield my time. Fuck you. What's yours?
Mine is very simple. Mine is a singer-songwriter, a man with an acoustic guitar and some soft melodies named Christian Lee Hudson. He just released an album called Beginners that was released in May of this year, and it was produced by Phoebe Bridgers, who is also going to release an album, I think sometime in the next couple weeks. And she's the reason I heard about this album. She has been one of the forces of indie rock over the last couple years. We'll talk about that album when it comes out, I'm sure. She's incredible. I love Phoebe Bridgers, but she's the producer of this album. She's the reason I heard it. It's called Beginners, and it's once again by Christian Lee Hudson. And it's kind of like, I feel like I've cited him a lot, but it's kind of a Elliott Smith-ish man with an acoustic guitar singing slow solo acoustic songs with a little bit of backup. And they're very simple songs, but I also feel like in this crazy time when you have even something like RTJ4, which is so heavily produced and kind of crazy, it's almost been nice to have this balm of calmness, which has been this album. And this is basically a man with an acoustic guitar singing about love and life, and it's not anything that's going to be revolutionary, but it's just calming and good and consistent. And it's only 10 tracks and it's 35 minutes and it's good. And that's worth something. So in this period of political revolution and crazy releases, this has been a calming thing for me while I've been writing and working towards other projects the last couple of weeks. Has been this background album and very good, just simple acoustic songs. So that's my recommendation. I'll throw a track on here now called Lose This Number. That's been, I think, the biggest track off the album. I'll throw that on here right now.
That night you shook me, but I wasn't sleeping. You were afraid of the thunder. Asked me to come in the bedroom. Pulled me under the covers. Lose this number. Lose this number.
So, yeah, otherwise, that's, I think, the show. Are we good this week, Tom? Anything else you want to bring up?
I'm good.
You're good?
No, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. Well, that's the show for this week. Please make sure you subscribe, rate, and review the show. Every one of those comments helps us out incredibly. Thank you to Zach Pitts for the theme music. Leave us comments wherever, and let us just know what you think. Check us out on YouTube. Tom, tell them where to find you.
Big Fat Bond on Twitter. I guess since I've mentioned Twitter, I'll say that. And Bendy, Tom Bendy on Instagram.
Awesome. I am Phil Wiedenheft on Twitter. You can find me there. Find me on Instagram at pwiedenheft. And from there, yeah, you'll just find some more information, see about our lives, and look in on us. Tom, I'll see you next week. We'll be talking about Judd Apatow, I believe. We've got several. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I just lied. We'll be talking about Spike Lee next week.
Yeah, that seems more appropriate. Right
Yeah. We'll talk about Spike Lee, and then the week after, we're going to talk about Judd Apatow and some of the movies.
Yeah, back to basics, baby.
Yeah, white people. I will say that about Judd. I was looking through his filmography right before we started recording. It's very white. Very, very.
Oh, he's the whitest filmmaker in the world.
Almost, I'll be honest, it shocked me a little bit. Almost like,
yes.
Like, I was like, yeah, there's the Mindy Kalings and Azizes that he's cast in minor roles in the past. But other than that, like, he has been shockingly white. And it was somewhat of a new realization for me. I don't think I quite realized it until like 5 minutes before we started recording this episode.
Yeah, maybe this Staten Island movie will be the one he gets called out for.
I don't think so. It's got the reviews. The embargo went up today, and so the reviews have come out and have been generally pretty positive. So
good. I thought the trailer looked good.
Yeah,
I'm excited.
I think the reviews have generally been positive. I'm excited to see it. We will peek in on it in a couple weeks, but it comes out the same day this Friday as The Five Bloods by Mr. Spike Lee and a couple other projects. And I think next week we're going to talk about Spike Lee. I think his work, along with, as we already talked about this week, Do the Right Thing, and some of the Clockers and other projects it just feels more of this moment. And it's also a new release mixed with that. So we're going to talk about his career, some of our, some picks that we've been revisiting and rewatching and re-examining.
Folks, if you can, obviously with The Five Bloods coming out, watch that. Watch Do the Right Thing. If you can only watch one Spike, if you can only do a single Spike, and you haven't seen it, for God's sakes, watch Do the Right Thing.
Yeah, it's crazy how perfect that movie is. It's in my top 10 of all time. It will never leave my top 10 of all time. It's a perfect movie. And yeah, we're probably not going to talk about that one next week because we have nothing to add to the millions of discussions about that movie. But we're going to talk about some of the smaller Spike Lee titles that have meant a lot to us over the years. And we're going to talk about everything leading up to Da 5 Bloods, his latest movie, coming out on Netflix next week. Look forward to that. We'll see you next week. Tom, all right, it's late. Let's go lay down.
Okay, bye everybody. Love you, love everyone. Me and Phil are going to go lay down together. Bye.
All right, bye.